Tonight, the sea is restless. Beyond the last harbor light, black waves rise beneath a sky torn by lightning. Old ships drift through the darkness with empty decks. Forgotten houses stand behind walls of whispering leaves. And unseen things wait at the edge of the firelight. In the world of William Hope Hodgson, terror does not announce itself. It moves through the storm, breathes behind locked doors, and watches from places no human being was ever meant to enter. For the next 3 hours, we journey into a realm of haunted seas, supernatural gateways, isolated rooms, and ancient horrors lurking just beyond the limits of reason. So dim the lights, settle into the darkness, and listen closely. This is William Hope Hodgson After Dark. If you enjoy the following stories, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know what you think. Now let's get into the first story. A Tropical Horror by William Hope Hodgson. We are 130 days out from Melbourne, and for 3 weeks we have lain in this sweltering calm. It is midnight, and our watch on deck until 4 a.m. I go out and sit on the hatch. A minute later, Jokey, our youngest prentice, joins me for a chatter. Many are the hours we have sat thus and talked in the night watches, though to be sure it is Jokey who does the talking. I am content to smoke and listen, giving an occasional grunt at seasons to show that I am attentive. Jokey has been silent for some time, his head bent in meditation. Suddenly he looks up, evidently with the intention of making some remark. As he does so, I see his face stiffen with a nameless horror. He crouches back, his eyes staring past me at some unseen fear. Then his mouth opens. He gives forth a strangulated cry and topples backward off the hatch, striking his head against the deck. Fearing I know not what, I turn to look. Great heavens! Rising above the bulwarks, seen plainly in the bright moonlight, is a vast slobbering mouth, a fathom across. From the huge dripping lips hang great tentacles. As I look, the thing comes further over the rail. It is rising higher and higher. There are no eyes visible, only that fearful slobbering mouth, set on the tremendous trunk-like neck, which even as I watch is curling inboard with the stealthy celerity of an enormous eel. Over it comes in vast heaving folds. Will it never end? The ship gives a slow, sullen roll to starboard as she feels the weight. Then the tail, a broad, flat-shaped mass, slips over the teak rail and falls with a loud slump onto the deck. For a few seconds, the hideous creature lies heaped in writhing, slimy coils. Then with quick, darting movements, the monstrous head travels along the deck. Close by the mainmast stand the harness casks, and alongside of these a freshly opened cask of salt beef with the top loosely replaced. The smell of the meat seems to attract the monster, and I can hear it sniffing with a vast, indrawing breath. Then those lips open, displaying 4 huge fangs. There is a quick forward motion of the head, a sudden crashing, crunching sound, and beef and barrel have disappeared. The noise brings one of the ordinary seamen out of the forecastle. Coming into the night, he can see nothing for a moment. Then as he gets further aft, he sees and with horrified cries rushes forward. Too late. From the mouth of the thing there flashes forth a long, broad blade of glistening white, set with fierce teeth. I avert my eyes but cannot shut out the sickening glut that follows. The man on the lookout, attracted by the disturbance, has witnessed the tragedy and flies for refuge into the forecastle, flinging to the heavy iron door after him. The carpenter and sailmaker come running out from the half-deck in their drawers. Seeing the awful thing, they rush aft to the cabin with shouts of fear. The second mate, after one glance over the break of the poop, runs down the companionway with the helmsman after him. I can hear them barring the scuttle, and abruptly I realize that I am on the main deck alone. So far I've forgotten my own danger. The past few minutes seem like a portion of an awful dream. Now, however, I comprehend my position, and shaking off the horror that has held me, turn to seek safety. As I do, my eyes fall upon Jokey, lying huddled and senseless with fright where he has fallen. I cannot leave him there. Close by stands the half-empty deck, a little steel-built house with iron doors. The lee one is hooked open. Once inside, I am safe. Up to the present, the thing has seemed to be unconscious of my presence. Now, however, the huge barrel-like head sways in my direction. Then comes a muffled bellow, and the great tongue flickers in and out as the brute turns and swirls aft to meet me. I know there is not a moment to lose, and picking up the helpless lad, I make a run for the open door. It is only distant a few yards, but that awful shape is coming down the deck to me in great wreathing coils. I reach the house and tumble in with my burden, then out on the deck again to unhook and close the door. Even as I do, something white curls round the end of the house. With a bound, I am inside and the door is shut and bolted. Through the thick glass of the ports, I see the thing sweep round the house, in vain search for me. Jokey has not moved yet, so kneeling down, I loosen his shirt collar and sprinkle some water from the breaker over his face. While I am doing this, I hear Morgan shout something. Then comes a great shriek of terror, and again, that sickening glut, glut. Jokey stirs uneasily, rubs his eyes, and sits up suddenly. "Was that Morgan shouting?" He breaks off with a cry. "Where are we? I've had such awful dreams." At this instant, there is a sound of running footsteps on the deck, and I hear Morgan's voice at the door. "Tom, open!" He stops abruptly and gives an awful cry of despair. Then I hear him rush forward. Through the porthole, I see him spring into the fore rigging and scramble madly aloft. Something steals up after him. It shows white in the moonlight. It wraps itself around his right ankle. Morgan stops dead, plucks out his sheath knife, and hacks fiercely at the fiendish thing. It lets go, and in a second he is over the top and running for dear life, up the gallant rigging. A time of quietness follows, and presently I see that the day is breaking. Not a sound can be heard, save the heavy gasping breathing of the thing. As the sun rises higher, the creature stretches itself out along the deck and seems to enjoy the warmth. Still no sound, either from the men forward or the officers aft. I can only suppose that they are afraid of attracting its attention. Yet a little later, I hear the report of a pistol away aft, and looking out, I see the serpent raise its huge head, as though listening. As it does, I get a good view of the forepart, and in the daylight see what the night has hidden. There, right about the mouth, is a pair of little pig eyes that seem to twinkle with a diabolical intelligence. It is swaying its head slowly from side to side. Then, without warning, it turns quickly and looks right in through the port. I dodge out of sight, but not soon enough. It has seen me, and brings its great mouth up against the glass. I hold my breath. My God, if it breaks the glass. I cower horrified. From the direction of the port there comes a loud, harsh, scraping sound. I shiver. Then I remember that there are little iron doors to shut over the ports in bad weather. Without a moment's waste of time, I rise to my feet and slam the door over the port. Then I go round to the others and do the same. We are now in darkness, and I tell Jokey in a whisper to light the lamp, which after some fumbling he does. About an hour before midnight I fall asleep. I am awakened suddenly some hours later by a scream of agony and the rattle of a water dipper. There is a slight scuffling sound, then that soul-revolting glut, glut. I guess what has happened. One of the men has slipped out of the forecastle to try and get a little water. Evidently he has trusted to the darkness to hide his movements. Poor beggar. He has paid for his attempt with his life. After this I cannot sleep, though the rest of the night passes quietly enough. Towards morning I doze a bit, but wake every few minutes with a start. Jokey is sleeping peacefully. Indeed, he seems worn out with the terrible strain of the past 24 hours. At 8 a.m. I call him and we make a light breakfast off the dry ship's biscuit and water. Of the latter, happily, we have a good supply. Jokey seems more himself and starts to talk a little, possibly somewhat louder than is safe. For as he chatters on, wondering how it will end, there comes a tremendous blow against the side of the house, making it ring again. After this, Jokey is very silent. As we sit there, I cannot but wonder what all the rest are doing, and how the poor beggars are faring, cooped up without water, as the tragedy of the night has proved. Towards noon I hear a loud bang, followed by a terrific bellowing. Then comes a great smashing of woodwork, and the cries of men in pain. Vainly I ask myself what has happened. I begin to reason. By the sound of the report, it was evidently something much heavier than a rifle or pistol. And judging from the mad roaring of the thing, the shot must have done some execution. On thinking it over further, I become convinced that, by some means, those aft have got hold of the small signal cannon we carry. And though I know that some have been hurt, perhaps killed, yet a feeling of exultation seizes me as I listen to the roars of the thing, and realize that it is badly wounded, perhaps mortally. After a while, however, the bellowing dies away, and only an occasional roar, denoting more of anger than aught else, is heard. Presently I become aware by the ship's canting over the starboard that the creature has gone over to that side, and a great hope springs up within me that possibly it has had enough of us and is going over the rail into the sea. For a time all is silent, and my hope grows stronger. I lean across and nudge Jokey, who is sleeping with his head on the table. He starts up sharply with a loud cry. "Hush!" I whisper hoarsely. "I'm not certain, but I do believe it's gone." Jokey's face brightens wonderfully, and he questions me eagerly. We wait another hour or so, with hope ever rising. Our confidence is returning fast. Not a sound can we hear, not even the breathing of the beast. I get out some biscuits, and Jokey, after rummaging in the locker, produces a small piece of pork and a bottle of ship's vinegar. We fall to with a relish. After our long abstinence from food, the meal acts on us like wine, and what must Jokey do but insist on opening the door to make sure the thing has gone? This I will not allow, telling him that at least it will be safer to open the iron pork covers first and have a look out. Jokey argues, but I am immovable. He becomes excited. I believe the youngster is lightheaded. Then, as I turn to unscrew one of the after covers, Jokey makes a dash at the door. Before he can undo the bolts, I have him, and after a short struggle lead him back to the table. Even as I endeavor to quiet him, there comes at the starboard door, the door that Jokey has tried to open, a sharp, loud sniff, followed immediately by a thunderous grunting howl, and a foul stench of putrid breath sweeps in under the door. A great trembling takes me, and were it not for the carpenter's tool chest, I should fall. Jokey turns very white and is violently sick, after which he is seized by a hopeless fit of sobbing. Hour after hour passes, and weary to death I lie down on the chest upon which I have been sitting, and try to rest. It must be about 2:30 in the morning, after a somewhat longer doze, that I am suddenly awakened by a most tremendous uproar away forrad. Men's voices shrieking, cursing, praying, but in spite of the terror expressed, so weak and feeble, while in the midst, and at times broken off short with that hellishly suggestive glut glut, is the unearthly bellowing of the thing. Fear incarnate seizes me, and I can only fall on my knees and pray. Too well I know what is happening. Jokey has slept through it all, and I am thankful. Presently under the door, there steals a narrow ribbon of light, and I know that the day has broken on the second morning of our imprisonment. I let Jokey sleep on. I will let him have peace while he may. Time passes, but I take little notice. The thing is quiet, probably sleeping. About midday I eat a little biscuit and drink some of the water. Jokey still sleeps. It is best so. A sound breaks the stillness. The ship gives a slight heave, and I know that once more the thing is awake. Round the deck it moves, causing the ship to roll perceptibly. Once it goes forrad, I fancy to again explore the forecastle. Evidently it finds nothing, for it returns almost immediately. It pauses a moment at the house, then goes on further aft. Up aloft somewhere in the fore-rigging, there rings out a peal of wild laughter, though sounding very faint and far away. The horror stops suddenly. I listen intently, but hear nothing save a sharp creaking beyond the after end of the house, as though a strain had come upon the rigging. A minute later I hear a cry aloft, followed almost instantly by a loud crash on deck that seems to shake the ship. I wait in anxious fear. What is happening? The minutes pass slowly. Then comes another frightened shout. It ceases suddenly. The suspense has become terrible, and I am no longer able to bear it. Very cautiously I open one of the after-port covers and peep out to see a fearful sight. There, with its tail upon the deck and its vast body curled round the mainmast, is the monster, its head above the topsail yard, and its great claw-armed tentacle waving in the air. It is the first proper sight that I have had of the thing. Good heavens! It must weigh 100 tons. Knowing that I shall have time, I open the port itself, then crane my head out and look up. There, on the extreme end of the lower topsail yard, I see one of the able seamen. Even down here I note the staring horror of his face. At this moment he sees me and gives a weak, hoarse cry for help. I can do nothing for him. As I look, the great tongue shoots out and licks him off the yard, much as might a dog a fly off the window pane. Higher still, but happily out of reach, are two more of the men. As far as I can judge, They are lashed to the mast above the royal yard. The thing attempts to reach them, but after a futile effort it ceases and starts to slide down, coil on coil, to the deck. While doing this, I noticed a great gaping wound on its body some 20 feet above the tail. I dropped my gaze from aloft to look aft. The cabin door is torn from its hinges, and the bulkhead, which unlike the half-deck is of teak wood, is partly broken down. With a shudder, I realize the cause of those cries after the cannon shot. Turning, I screw my head round and try to see the foremast, but cannot. The sun, I notice, is low, and the night is near. Then I draw in my head and fasten up both port and cover. How will it end? Oh, how will it end? After a while, Jokey wakes up. He is very restless, yet though he has eaten nothing during the day, I cannot get him to touch anything. Night draws on. We are too weary, too dispirited to talk. I lie down, but not to sleep. Time passes. A ventilator rattles violently somewhere on the main deck, and there sounds constantly that slurring, gritty noise. Later I hear a cat's agonized howl, and then again all is quiet. Some time after comes a great splash alongside. Then for some hours, all is silent as the grave. Occasionally I sit up on the chest and listen, yet never a whisper of noise comes to me. There is an absolute silence. Even the monotonous creak of the gear has died away entirely, and at last a real hope is springing up within me. That splash, this silence, surely I am justified in hoping. I do not wake Jokey this time. I will prove first for myself that all is safe. Still I wait. I will run no unnecessary risks. After a time I creep to the afterport and will listen, but there is no sound. I put up my hand and feel at the screw, and again I hesitate, yet not for long. Noiselessly I begin to unscrew the fastening of the heavy shield. It swings loose on its hinge, and I pull it back and peer out. My heart is beating madly. Everything seems strangely dark outside. Perhaps the moon is gone behind a cloud. Suddenly a beam of moonlight enters through the port and goes as quickly. I stare out. Something moves. Again the light streams in, and now I seem to be looking into a great cavern, at the bottom of which quivers and curls something palely white. My heart seems to stand still. It is the horror. I start back and seize the iron port flap to slam it to, and as I do so, something strikes the glass like a steam ram, shatters it to atoms, and flicks past me into the berth. I scream and spring away. The port is quite filled with it. The lamp shows it dimly. It is curling and twisting here and there. It is as thick as a tree, and covered with a smooth, slimy skin. At the end is a great claw like a lobster's, only 1,000 times larger. I cower down into the farthest corner. It has broken the tool chest to pieces with one click of those frightful mandibles. Jokey has crawled under a bunk. The thing sweeps round in my direction. I feel a drop of sweat trickle slowly down my face. It tastes salty. Nearer comes that awful death. Crash! I roll over backwards. It has crushed the water breaker against which I leant, and I am rolling in the water across the floor. The claw drives up, then down with a quick, uncertain movement, striking the deck a dull, heavy blow, a foot from my head. Jokey gives a little gasp of horror. Slowly the thing rises and starts feeling its way round the berth. It plunges into a bunk and pulls out a bolster, nips it in half and drops it, then moves on. It is feeling along the deck. As it does so, it comes across a half of the bolster. It seems to toy with it, then picks it up and takes it out through the port. A wave of putrid air fills the berth. There is a grating sound and something enters the port again, something white and tapering and set with teeth. Hither and thither it curls, rasping over the bunks, ceiling, and deck, with a noise like that of a great saw at work. Twice it flickers above my head, and I close my eyes. Then off it goes again. It sounds now on the opposite side of the berth and nearer to Jokey. Suddenly, the harsh, raspy noise becomes muffled, as though the teeth were passing across some soft substance. Jokey gives a horrid little scream that breaks off into a bubbling, whistling sound. I open my eyes. The tip of the vast tongue is curled tightly round something that drips, then is quickly withdrawn, allowing the moonbeams to steal again into the berth. I rise to my feet. Looking round, I note in a mechanical sort of way the wrecked state of the berth, the shattered chests, the dismantled bunks, and something else. Jokey! I cry, and tingle all over. There is that awful thing again at the port. I glance round for a weapon. I will revenge Jokey. Ah, there, right under the lamp, where the wreck of the carpenter's chest strews the floor, lies a small hatchet. I spring forward and seize it. It is small, but so keen, so keen. I feel its razor edge lovingly. Then I am back at the port. I stand to one side and raise my weapon. The great tongue is feeling its way to those fearsome remains. It reaches them. As it does so, with a scream of "Jokey! Jokey!" I strike savagely again and again and again, gasping as I strike once more, and the monstrous mass falls to the deck, writhing like a hideous eel. A vast, warm flood rushes in through the porthole. There is a sound of breaking steel and an enormous bellowing. A singing comes in my ears and grows louder, louder. Then the berth grows indistinct and suddenly dark. Extract from the log of the steamship Hispaniola. June 4th, latitude, north longitude, west, 11 a.m. Sighted four-masted bark about 4 points on the port bow, flying signal of distress. Ran down to her and sent a boat aboard. She proved to be the Glendoon, homeward bound from Melbourne to London. Found things in a terrible state. Decks covered with blood and slime. Steel deckhouse stove in. Broke open door and discovered youth of about 19, in last stage of inanition. Also parts remain of a boy about 14 years of age. There was a great quantity of blood in the place, and a huge curled-up mass of whitish flesh, weighing about half a ton, one end of which appeared to have been hacked through with a sharp instrument. Found forecastle door open and hanging from one hinge. Doorway bulged as though something had been forced through. Went inside. Terrible state of affairs. Blood everywhere. Broken chests. Smashed bunks. But no men nor remains. Went aft again and found youth showing signs of recovery. When he came round, gave the name of Thompson. Said they had been attacked by a huge serpent. Thought it must have been sea serpent. He was too weak to say much, but told us there were some men up the mainmast. Sent a hand aloft, who reported them lashed to the royal mast, and quite dead. Went aft to the cabin. Here we found the bulkhead smashed to pieces, and the cabin door lying on the deck near the after hatch. Found body of captain down Lazaret, but no officers. Noticed amongst the wreckage part of the carriage of a small cannon. Came aboard again. Have sent the second mate with 6 men to work her into port. Thompson is with us. He has written out his version of the affair. We certainly consider that the state of the ship, as we found her, bears out in every respect his story. Signed, William Norton, Master, Tom Briggs, First Mate. Out of the Storm, by William Hope Hodgson. "Hush!" said my friend the scientist as I walked into his laboratory. I had opened my lips to speak, but stood silent for a few minutes at his request. He was sitting at his instrument, and the thing was tapping out a message in a curiously irregular fashion, stopping a few seconds, then going on at a furious pace. It was during a somewhat longer than usual pause that, growing slightly impatient, I ventured to address him. "Anything important?" I asked. "For God's sake, shut up!" he answered back in a high, strained voice. I stared. I am used to pretty abrupt treatment from him, at times when he is much engrossed in some particular experiment, but this was going a little too far, and I said so. He was writing, and for reply he pushed several loosely written sheets over to me, with one curt word: "Read!" With a sense half of anger, half of curiosity, I picked up the first and glanced at it. After a few lines I was gripped and held securely by a morbid interest. I was reading a message from one in the last extremity. I will give it word for word. "John, we are sinking. I wonder if you really understand what I feel at the present time. You sitting comfortably in your laboratory, I out here upon the waters, already one among the dead. Yes, we are doomed. There is no such thing as help in our case. We are sinking, steadily, remorselessly. God, I must keep up and be a man. I need not tell you that I am in the operator's room. All the rest are on deck, or dead in the hungry thing which is smashing the ship to pieces. I do not know where we are, and there is no one whom I can ask. The last of the officers was drowned nearly an hour ago, and the vessel is now little more than a sort of breakwater for the giant seas. Once, about a half an hour ago, I went out onto the deck. My God, the sight was terrible. It is a little after midday, but the sky is the color of mud, do you understand? Gray mud. Down from it there hang vast lappets of clouds, not such clouds as I have ever seen before, but monstrous, mildewed-looking hulls. They show solid save where the frightful wind tears their lower edges into great feelers that swirl savagely above us, like the tentacles of some enormous horror. Such a sight is difficult to describe to the living, though the dead of the sea know of it, without words of mine. It is such a sight that none is allowed to see and live. It is a picture for the doomed and the dead, one of the sea's hell orgies, one of the thing's monstrous gloatings over the living, say the alive in death, those upon the brink. I have no right to tell of it to you. To speak of it to one of the living is to initiate innocence into one of the infernal mysteries. To talk of foul things to a child, yet I care not. I will expose, in all its hideous nakedness, the death side of the sea. The undoomed living shall know some of the things that death has hitherto so well guarded. Death knows naught of this little instrument beneath my hands that connects me still with the quick, else would he haste to quiet me. Hark you, John, I have learnt undreamt of things in this little time of waiting. I know now why we are afraid of the dark. I had never imagined such secrets of the sea and the grave, which are one and the same. Listen! Ah, but I was forgetting you cannot hear. I can. The sea is, hush! The sea is laughing, as though hell cackled from the mouth of an ass. It is jeering. I can hear its voice echo like the satanic thunder amid the mud overhead. It is calling to me. Call. I must go. The sea calls. O God, art thou indeed God? Canst thou sit above the watch calmly that which I have just seen? Nay, thou art no God. Thou art weak and puny beside this foul thing which thou didst create in thy lusty youth. It is now God, and I am one of its children. Are you there, John? Why don't you answer? Listen, I ignore God, for there is a stronger than he. My God is here beside me, around me, and will be soon above me. You know what that means? It is merciless. The sea is now all the God there is. That is one of the things I have learnt. Listen, it is laughing again. God is it, not he. It called, and I went out onto the decks. All was terrible. It is in the waste everywhere. It has swamped the ship. Only the forecastle, bridge, and poop stick up out of the bestial, reeking thing, like 3 islands in the midst of shrieking foam. At times, gigantic billows assail the ship from both sides. They form momentary arches above the vessel, arches of dull, curved water 100 feet towards the hideous sky. Then they descend, roaring. Think of it. You cannot. There is an infection of sin in the air. It is the exhalations from the thing. Those left upon the drenched islets of shattered wood and iron are doing the most horrible things. The thing is teaching them. Later, I felt the vile informing of its breath, but I have fled back here to pray for death. On the forecastle, I saw a mother and her little son clinging to an iron rail. A great billow heaved up above them, descended in a falling mountain of brine. It passed, and they were still there. The thing was only toying with them. Yet all the same, it had torn the hands of the child from the rail, and the child was clinging frantically to its mother's arm. I saw another vast hill hurl up to port and hover above them. Then the mother stooped and bit like a foul beast at the hands of her wee son. She was afraid that his little additional weight would be more than she could hold. I heard his scream even where I stood. It drove to me upon that wild laughter. It told me again that God is not he, but it. Then the hill thundered down upon those two. It seemed to me that the thing gave a bellow as it leapt. It roared about them, churning and growling, then surged away. And there was only one, the mother. There appeared to me to be blood as well as water upon her face, especially about her mouth. But the distance was too great, and I cannot be sure. I looked away. Close to me I saw something further, a beautiful young girl, her soul hideous with the breath of the thing, struggling with her sweetheart for the shelter of the chart-house side. He threw her off, but she came back at him. I saw her hand come from her head, where she still clung the wreckage of some form of headgear. She struck at him. He shouted and fell away to leeward, and she smiled, showing her teeth. So much for that. I turned elsewhere. Out upon the thing I saw gleams, horrid and suggestive. Below H, the crest of the waves. I have never seen them until this time. I saw a rough sailorman washed away from the vessel. One of the huge breakers snapped at him. Those things were teeth. It has teeth. I heard them clash. I heard his yell. It was no more than a mosquito shrilling amid all that laughter, but it was very terrible. There is worse than death. The ship is lurching very queerly with a sort of sickening heave. I fancy I have been asleep. No, I remember now. I hit my head when she rolled so strangely. My leg is doubled under me. I think it is broken, but it does not matter. I have been praying. What was it? I feel calmer, more resigned now. I think I have been mad. What was it that I was saying? I cannot remember. It was something about God. I believe I blasphemed. May he forgive me. Thou knowest, God, that I was not in my right mind. Thou knowest that I am very weak. Be with me in the coming time. I have sinned, but thou art all merciful. Are you there, John? It is very near the end now. I had so much to say, but it all slips from me. What was it that I said? I take it all back. I was mad, and God knows. He is merciful, and I have very little pain now. I feel a bit drowsy. I wonder whether you are there, John. Perhaps after all no one has heard the things I have said. It is better so. The living are not meant, and yet I do not know. If you are there, John, you will tell her how it was. But not, hark! There was such a thunder of water overhead just then. I fancy two vast seas have met in mid-air across the top of the bridge and burst all over the vessel. It must be soon now, and there was such a number of things I had to say. I can hear voices in the wind. They are singing. It is like an enormous dirge. I think I have been dozing again. I pray God humbly that it be soon. You will not tell her anything about what I may have said, will you, John? I mean those things which I ought not to have said. What was it I did say? My head is growing strangely confused. I wonder whether you really do hear me. I may be talking only to that vast roar outside. Still, it is some comfort to go on, and I will not believe that you do not hear all I say. Hark again! A mountain of brine must have swept clean over the vessel. She has gone right over onto her side. She is back again. It will be very soon now. Are you there, John? Are you there? It is coming. The sea has come for me. It is rushing down through the companionway. It is like a vast jet. My God, I am drowning. Demons of the Sea by William Hope Hodgson. Come out on the deck and have a look, darky, Jepson cried, rushing into the half deck. The old man says there's been a submarine earthquake and the sea's all bubbling and muddy. Obeying the summons of Jepson's excited tone, I followed him out. It was as he had said. The everlasting blue of the ocean was mottled with splotches of a muddy hue, and at times a large bubble would appear to burst with a loud pop. Aft, the skipper and the three mates could be seen on the poop, peering at the sea through their glasses. As I gazed out over the gently heaving water, far off to windward something was hove up into the evening air. It appeared to be a mass of seaweed, but fell back into the water with a sullen plunge as though it were something more substantial. Immediately after this strange occurrence, the sun set with tropical swiftness, and in the brief afterglow things assumed a strange unreality. The crew were all below, no one but the mate and the helmsman remaining on the poop. Away forward on the top-gallant forecastle head, the dim figure of the man on lookout could be seen, leaning against the forestay. No sound was heard save the occasional jingle of a chained sheet, or the flog of the steering gear as a small swell passed under our counter. Presently the mate's voice broke the silence, and looking up I saw that the old man had come on deck and was talking with him. From the few stray words that could be overheard, I knew they were talking of the strange happenings of the day. Shortly after sunset, the wind, which had been fresh during the day, died down, and with its passing the air grew oppressively hot. Not long after 2 bells the mate sung out for me, and ordered me to fill a bucket from overside and bring it to him. When I had carried out his instructions, he placed a thermometer in the bucket. "Just as I thought," he muttered, removing the instrument and showing it to the skipper. 99 degrees. Why, the sea's hot enough to make tea with. Hope it doesn't get any hotter, growled the latter. If it does, we shall all be boiled alive. At a sign from the mate, I emptied the bucket and replaced it in the rack, after which I resumed my former position by the rail. The old man and the mate walked the poop side by side. The air grew hotter as the hours passed, and after a long period of silence, broken only by the occasional pop of a bursting gas bubble, the moon arose. It shed but a feeble light, however, as a heavy mist had arisen from the sea, and through this the moonbeams struggled weakly. The mist, we decided, was due to the excessive heat of the seawater. It was a very wet mist, and we were soon soaked to the skin. Slowly the interminable night wore on, and the sun arose, looking dim and ghostly through the mist that rolled and billowed about the ship. From time to time we took the temperature of the sea, although we found but a slight increase therein. No work was done, and a feeling as of something impending pervaded the ship. The foghorn was kept going constantly, as the lookout peered through the wreathing mists. The captain walked the poop in company with the mates, and once the third mate spoke and pointed out into the clouds of fog. All eyes followed his gesture. We saw what was apparently a black line, which seemed to cut the whiteness of the billows. It reminded us of nothing so much as an enormous cobra standing on its tail. As we looked, it vanished. The grouped mates were evidently puzzled. There seemed to be a difference of opinion among them. Presently, as they argued, I heard the second mate's voice. "That's all rot," he said. "I've seen things in the fog before, but they've always turned out to be imaginary." The third shook his head and made some reply I could not overhear, but no further comment was made. Going below that afternoon, I got a short sleep, and on coming on deck at 8 bells, I found that the steam still held us. If anything, it seemed to be thicker than ever. Hansard, who had been taking the temperatures during my watch below, informed me that the sea was 3 degrees hotter, and that the old man was getting into a rare old state. At 3 bells I went forward to have a look over the bows, and a chin with Stevenson, whose lookout it was. On gaining the forecastle head, I went to the side and looked down into the water. Stevenson came over and stood beside me. "Rum go this," he grumbled. He stood by my side for a time in silence. We seemed to be hypnotized by the gleaming surface of the sea. Suddenly, out of the depths right before us, there arose a monstrous black face. It was like a frightful caricature of a human countenance. For a moment we gazed petrified. My blood seemed to suddenly turn to ice water. I was unable to move. With a mighty effort of will, I regained my self-control, and grasping Stevenson's arm, I found I could do no more than croak. My powers of speech seemed gone. "Look!" I gasped. "Look!" Stevenson continued to stare into the sea, like a man turned to stone. He seemed to stoop further over as if to examine the thing more closely. "Lord," he exclaimed, "it must be the devil himself." As though the sound of his voice had broken a spell, the thing disappeared. My companion looked at me while I rubbed my eyes, thinking that I had been asleep, and that the awful vision had been a frightful nightmare. One look at my friend, however, disabused me of any such thought. His face wore a puzzled expression. "Better go aft and tell the old man," he faltered. I nodded and left the forecastle head, making my way aft like one in a trance. The skipper and the mate were standing at the break of the poop, and running up the ladder I told them what we had seen. "Bosh!" sneered the old man. "You've been looking at your own ugly reflection in the water." Nevertheless, in spite of his ridicule, he questioned me closely. Finally, he ordered the mate forward to see if he could see anything. The latter, however, returned in a few moments to report that nothing unusual could be seen. 4 bells were struck, and we were relieved for tea. Coming on deck afterward, I found the men clustered together forward. The sole topic of conversation with them was the thing that Stevenson and I had seen. "I suppose, darky, it couldn't have been a reflection by any chance, could it?" one of the older men asked. "Ask Stevenson," I replied as I made my way aft. At 8 bells my watch came on deck again, to find that nothing further had developed. But about an hour before midnight, the mate, thinking to have a smoke, sent me to his room for a box of matches with which to light his pipe. It took me no time to clatter down the brass-treaded ladder and back to the poop, where I handed him the desired article. Taking the box, he removed a match and struck it on the heel of his boot. As he did so, far out in the night, a muffled screaming arose. Then came a clamor as of hoarse braying, like an ass but considerably deeper, and with a horribly suggestive human note running through it. "Good God, did you hear that, darky?" asked the mate in odd tones. "Yes, sir," I replied, listening and scarcely noticing his question, for a repetition of the strange sounds. Suddenly the frightful bellowing broke out afresh. The mate's pipe fell to the deck with a clatter. "Run forward," he cried. "Quick now, and see if you can see anything." With my heart in my mouth and pulses pounding madly, I raced forward. The watch were all up on the forecastle head, clustered around the lookout. Each man was talking and gesticulating wildly. They became silent and turned questioning glances toward me as I shouldered my way among them. "Have you seen anything?" I cried. Before I could receive an answer, a repetition of the horrid sounds broke out again, profaning the night with their horror. They seemed to have definite direction now, in spite of the fog that enveloped us. Undoubtedly, too, they were nearer. Pausing a moment to make sure of their bearing, I hastened aft and reported to the mate. I told him that nothing could be seen, but that the sounds apparently came from right ahead of us. On hearing this, he ordered the man at the wheel to let the ship's head come off a couple of points. A moment later, a shrill screaming tore its way through the night, followed by the hoarse, braying sounds once more. "It's close on the starboard bow!" exclaimed the mate as he beckoned the helmsman to let her head come off a little more. Then, singing out for the watch, he ran forward, slacking the lee braces on the way. When he had the yards trimmed to his satisfaction on the new course, he returned to the poop and hung far out over the rail, listening intently. Moments passed that seemed like hours, yet the silence remained unbroken. Suddenly the sounds began again, and so close that it seemed as though they must be right aboard of us. At this time I noticed a strange booming note mingled with the brays, and once or twice there came a sound that can only be described as a sort of gug, gug. Then would come a wheezy whistling, for all the world like an asthmatic person breathing. All this while the moon shone wanly through the steam, which seemed to me to be somewhat thinner. Once the mate gripped me by the shoulder as the noises rose and fell again. They seemed to be coming from a point broad on our beam. Every eye on the ship was straining into the mist, but with no result. Suddenly one of the men cried out as something long and black slid past us into the fog astern. From it there rose 4 indistinct and ghostly towers, which resolved themselves into spars and ropes and sails. "It's a ship! It's a ship!" we cried excitedly. I turned to Mr. Gray. He too had seen something, and was staring aft into the wake. So ghost-like, unreal, and fleeting had been our glimpse of the stranger, that we were not sure that we had seen an honest, material ship, but thought that we had been vouchsafed a vision of some phantom vessel like the Flying Dutchman. Our sails gave a sudden flap, the clew irons flogging the bulwarks with hollow thumps. The mate glanced aloft. "Wind's dropping," he growled savagely. "We shall never get out of this infernal place at this gait." Gradually the wind fell until it was a flat calm. No sound broke the death-like silence save the rapid patter of the reef points, as she gently rose and fell on the light swell. Hours passed and the watch was relieved, and then I went below. At 7 bells we were called again, and as I went along the deck to the galley, I noticed that the fog seemed thinner and the air cooler. When 8 bells were struck, I relieved Hansard at the coiling down the ropes. From him I learned that the steam had begun to clear about 4 bells, and that the temperature of the sea had fallen 10 degrees. In spite of the thinning mist, it was not until about a half an hour later that we were able to get a glimpse of the surrounding sea. It was still mottled with dark patches, but the bubbling and popping had ceased. As much of the surface of the ocean as could be seen had a peculiarly desolate aspect. Occasionally a wisp of steam would float up from the nearer sea and roll undulatingly across its silent surface, until lost in the vagueness that still held the hidden horizon. Here and there columns of steam rose up in pillars, which gave me the impression that the sea was hot in patches. Crossing to the starboard side and looking over, I found that conditions there were similar to those to port. The desolate aspect of the sea filled me with an idea of chilliness, although the air was quite warm and muggy. From the break of the poop the mate called to me to get his glasses. When I had done this, he took them from me and walked to the taffrail. Here he stood for some moments polishing them with his handkerchief. After a moment he raised them to his eyes and peered long and intently into the mist astern. I stood for some time staring at the point on which the mate had focused his glasses. Presently something shadowy grew upon my vision. Steadily watching it, I distinctly saw the outlines of a ship take form in the fog. "See!" I cried, but even as I spoke the lifting wraith of mist disclosed to view a great 4-masted bark lying becalmed with all sails set, within a few hundred yards of our stern. As though a curtain had been raised and then allowed to fall, the fog once more settled down, hiding the strange bark from our sight. The mate was all excitement, striding with quick, jerky steps up and down the poop, stopping every few moments to peer through his glasses at the point where the 4-master had disappeared in the fog. Gradually, as the mists dispersed again, the vessel could be seen more plainly, and it was then that we got an inkling of the cause of the dreadful noises during the night. For some time the mate watched her silently, and as he watched the conviction grew upon me that in spite of the mist, I could detect some sort of movement on board of her. After some time had passed, the doubt became a certainty, and I could also see a sort of splashing in the water alongside of her. Suddenly, the mate put his glasses on top of the wheel box and told me to bring him the speaking trumpet. Running to the companionway, I secured the trumpet and was back at his side. The mate raised it to his lips and, taking a deep breath, sent a hail across the water that should have awakened the dead. We waited tensely for a reply. A moment later, a deep, hollow mutter came from the bark. Higher and louder it swelled, until we realized we were listening to the same sounds we had heard the night before. The mate stood aghast at this answer to his hail. In a voice barely more than a hushed whisper, he bade me call the old man. Attracted by the mate's hail and its unearthly reply, the watch had all come aft and were clustered in the mizzen rigging in order to see better. After calling the captain, I returned to the poop, where I found the second and third mates talking with the chief. All were engaged in trying to pierce the clouds of mist that half hid our strange consort and to arrive at some explanation of the strange phenomena of the past few hours. A moment later, the captain appeared carrying his telescope. The mate gave him a brief account of the state of affairs and handed him the trumpet. Giving me the telescope to hold, the captain hailed the shadowy bark. Breathlessly, we all listened, when again, in answer to the old man's hail, the frightful sounds rose on the still morning air. The skipper lowered the trumpet and stood with an expression of astonished horror on his face. "Lord!" he exclaimed. "What an ungodly row!" At this, the third, who had been gazing through his binoculars, broke the silence. "Look!" he ejaculated. "There's a breeze coming up astern." At his words, the captain looked up quickly, and we all watched the ruffling water. "That packet yonder is bringing the breeze with her," said the skipper. "She'll be alongside in half an hour." Some moments passed, and the bank of fog had come to within 100 yards of our taffrail. The strange vessel could be distinctly seen just inside the fringe of the driving mist wreaths. After a short puff, the wind died completely, but as we stared with hypnotic fascination, the water astern of the stranger ruffled again, with a fresh cat's paw. Seemingly with the flapping of her sails, she drew slowly up to us. As the leaden seconds passed, the big four-master approached us steadily. The light air had now reached us, and with a lazy lift of our sails, we too began to forge slowly through that weird sea. The bark was now within 50 yards of our stern, and she was steadily drawing nearer, seeming to be able to outfoot us with ease. As she came on, she luffed sharply, and came up into the wind with her weather leeches shaking. I looked toward her poop, thinking to discern the figure of the man at the wheel, but the mist coiled around her quarter, and objects on the after end of her became indistinguishable. With a rattle of chain sheets on her iron yard, she filled away again. We, meanwhile, had gone ahead, but it was soon evident that she was the better sailor, for she came up to us hand over fist. The wind rapidly freshened, and the mist began to drift away before it, so that each moment her spars and cordage became more plainly visible. The skipper and the mates were watching her intently when an almost simultaneous exclamation of fear broke from them. "My God!" And well they might show signs of fear, for crawling about the bark's deck were the most horrible creatures I had ever seen. In spite of their unearthly strangeness, there was something vaguely familiar about them. Then it came to me that the face that Stevenson and I had seen during the night belonged to one of them. Their bodies had something of the shape of a seal's, but of a dead, unhealthy white. The lower part of the body ended in a sort of double-curved tail on which they appeared to be able to shuffle about. In place of arms, they had two long, snaky feelers, at the ends of which were two very human-like hands, which were equipped with talons instead of nails. Fearsome indeed were these parodies of human beings. Their faces, which, like their tentacles, were black, were the most grotesquely human things about them, and the upper jaw closed into the lower, after the manner of the jaws of an octopus. I have seen men among certain tribes of natives who had faces uncommonly like theirs, but yet no native I had ever seen could have given me the extraordinary feeling of horror and revulsion I experienced towards these brutal-looking creatures. "What devilish beasts!" burst out the captain in disgust. With this remark he turned to the mates, and as he did so, the expressions on their faces told me that they had all realized what the presence of these bestial-looking brutes meant. If, as was doubtless the case, these creatures had boarded the bark and destroyed her crew, what would prevent them from doing the same with us? We were a smaller ship and had a smaller crew, and the more I thought of it, the less I liked it. We could now see the name of the bark's bow with the naked eye. It read Scottish Heath, while on our boats we could see the name bracketed with Glasgow, showing that she hailed from that port. It was a remarkable coincidence that she should have a slant from just the quarter in which yards were trimmed, as before we saw her she must have been drifting around with everything aback. But now in this light air, she was able to run alongside us with no one at her helm. But steering herself as she was, and although at times she yawned wildly, she never got herself aback. As we gazed at her, we noticed a sudden movement on board of her, and several of the creatures slid into the water. "See! See! They've spotted us! They're coming for us!" cried the mate wildly. It was only too true. Scores of them were sliding into the sea, letting themselves down by means of their long tentacles. On they came, slipping by scores and hundreds into the water, and swimming toward us in droves. The ship was making about 3 knots, otherwise they would have caught us in a very few minutes. But they persevered, gaining slowly but surely, and drawing nearer and nearer. The long tentacle-like arms rose out of the sea in hundreds, and the foremost ones were already within a score of yards of the ship before the old man bethought himself to shout to the mates to fetch up the half-dozen cutlasses that comprised the ship's armory. Then turning to me, he ordered me to go down to his cabin and bring up the 2 revolvers out of the top drawer of the chart table, also a box of cartridges that was there. When I returned with the weapons, he loaded them and handed one to the mate. Meanwhile, the pursuing creatures were coming steadily nearer, and soon half a dozen of the leaders were directly under our counter. Immediately, the captain leaned over the rail and emptied his pistol into them, but without any apparent effect. He must have realized how puny and ineffectual his efforts were, for he did not reload his weapon. Some dozen of the brutes had reached us, and as they did so, their tentacles rose into the air and caught our rail. I heard the 3rd mate scream suddenly, and turning, I saw him dragged quickly to the rail with a tentacle wrapped completely around him. Snatching a cutlass, the 2nd mate hacked off the tentacle where it joined the body. A gout of blood splashed into the 3rd mate's face, and he fell to the deck. A dozen more of those arms rose and wavered in the air, but they now seemed some yards astern of us. A rapidly widening patch of clear water appeared between us and the foremost of our pursuers, and we raised a wild shout of joy. The cause was soon apparent, for a fine fair wind had sprung up, and with the increase in its force the Scottish Heath had got herself aback, while we were rapidly leaving the monsters behind us. The 3rd mate rose to his feet with a dazed look, and as he did so something fell to the deck. I picked it up and found that it was the severed portion of the tentacle of the 3rd's late adversary. With a grimace of disgust I tossed it into the sea, as I needed no reminder of that awful experience. 3 weeks later we anchored in San Francisco. There the captain made a full report of the affair to the authorities, with the result that a gunboat was dispatched to investigate. 6 weeks later she returned to report that she had been unable to find any signs, either of the ship herself or of the fearful creatures that had attacked her. And since then nothing, as far as I know, has ever been heard of the 4-masted bark Scottish Heath, last seen by us in the possession of creatures that may rightly be called demons of the sea. Whether she still floats, occupied by her hellish crew, or whether some storm has sent her to her last resting place beneath the waves, is surely a matter of conjecture. Perchance on some dark, fog-bound night, a ship in that wilderness of waters may hear cries and sounds beyond those of the wailing of the winds. Then let them look to it, for it may be that the demons of the sea are near them. On the Bridge by William Hope Hodgson. The 8 to 12 watch, and ice was in sight at nightfall. In memory of April 14th, 1912, latitude 41 degrees 16 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees 14 minutes west. 2 bells had just gone. It is 9 o'clock. You walk to the windward and sniff anxiously. Yes, there it is, unmistakably. The never-to-be-forgotten smell of ice. A smell as indescribable as it is unmistakable. You stare, fiercely anxious, almost incredibly anxious, to windward and sniff again and again. And you never cease to peer until the very eyeballs ache. And you curse almost insanely because some door has been opened and lets out a shaft of futile and dangerous light across the gloom, through which the great ship is striding across the miles. For the least show of light about the deck blinds the officer of the watch temporarily, and makes the darkness of the night a double curtain of gloom, threatening hatefully. You curse and phone angrily for a steward to go along and have the door shut or the window covered, as the case may be, then once again to the dreadful strain of watching. Just try to take it all in. You are perhaps only a young man of 26 or 28, and you are in sole charge of that great bulk of life and wealth, thundering on across the miles. 1 hour of your watch is gone, and there are 3 to come, and already you are feeling the strain. And reason enough, too, for though the bridge telegraph pointer stands at half speed, you know perfectly well that the engine room has its private orders, and speed is not cut down at all. And all around to windward and leeward, you can see the gloom pierced dimly in this place and that, everlastingly by the bursts of phosphorescence from breaking sea crests. Thousands and tens of thousands of times you see this, ahead and upon either beam, and you sniff and try to distinguish between the coldness of the half-gale and the peculiar of what I might term the personal, brutal, ugly chill of death that comes stealing down to you through the night as you pass some ice hill in the darkness. And then those countless bursts of dull phosphorescence that break out eternally from the chaos of the unseen waters about you become suddenly things of threatening that frighten you, for any one of them may mean broken water about the unseen shore of some hidden island of ice in the night, some half-submerged, inert, insensate monster of ice lurking under the wash of the seas, trying to steal unperceived athwart your hawse. You raise your hand instinctively in the darkness, and the cry, "Hard a starboard!" literally trembles on your lips, and then you are saved from making an over-anxious spectacle of yourself, for you see now that the particular burst of phosphorescence that had seemed so pregnant of ice is nothing more than any one of the 10,000 other bursts of sea light that come and go among the great moundings of the sea foam in the surrounding night. And yet there is that infernal ice smell again, and the chill that I have called the chill of death is stealing in again upon you from some unknown quarter of the night. You send word forward to the lookouts and to the man in the nest, and redouble your own care of the 1,000 humans who sleep so trustfully in their bunks beneath your feet, trusting you, a young man, with their lives, with everything. They in the great ship that strides so splendid and blind through the night and the dangers of the night are all, as it were, in the hollow of your hand. A moment of inattention, and 1,000 deaths upon the head of your father's son. Do not wonder that you watch, with your very heart seeming dry with anxiety, on such a night as this. 4 bells, 5 bells, 6 bells, and now there is only an hour to go. Yet already you have nearly given the signal 3 times to the quartermaster to port or starboard, as the case may be. But each time the conjured terror of the night, the dree, suggestive foam lights, the infernal ice smell, and the chill of death have proved to be no true prophets of disaster in your track. 7 bells, my God! Even as the sweet silver sounds wander fore and aft into the night, and are engulfed by the gale, you see something close upon the starboard bow, a boil of phosphorescent lights over some low-lying, sea-buried thing in the darkness. Your night glasses are glaring at it, and then, even before the various lookouts can make their reports, you know, my God, your spirit is crying inside of you. My God, but your human voice is roaring words that hold life and death for 1,000 sleeping souls. Hard a starboard! Hard a starboard! The man in the wheelhouse leaps at your cry, at the fierce intensity of it, and then with a momentary loss of nerve, whirls the wheel the wrong way. You make one jump and are into the wheelhouse. The glass is tinkling all about you, and you do not know in that instant that you are carrying the frame of the shattered wheelhouse door upon your shoulders. Your fist takes the frightened helmsman under the jaw, and your free hand grips the spokes and dashes the wheel round toward you, engine roaring away in its appointed place. Your junior has already flown to his post at the telegraph, and the engine room is answering the order you have flung at him as you leapt for the wheelhouse. But you, why, you are staring half-mad through the night, watching the monster bows swing to port against the mighty background of the night, the seconds of the beats of eternity, in that brief, tremendous time, and then, aloud to the wind and the night, you mutter, "Thank God," for she has swung clear, and below you the 1,000 sleepers sleep on. A fresh quartermaster has come aft, to use the old term, to relieve the other, and you stagger out of the wheelhouse, becoming conscious of the inconvenience of the broken woodwork around you. Several people are assisting you to divest yourself of the framework of the door, and your junior has a queer little air of respect for you, that somehow the darkness is not capable of hiding. You go back to your post then, but perhaps you feel a little sick, despite a certain happy elation that stimulates you. 8 bells, and your brother officer comes up to relieve you. The usual formula is gone through, and you go down the bridge steps to the 1,000 sleeping ones. Next day 1,000 passengers play their games, and read their books, and talk their talks, and make their usual sweepstakes, and never even notice that one of the officers is a little weary looking. The carpenter has replaced the door, and a certain quartermaster will stand no more at the wheel. For the rest, all goes on as usual, and no one ever knows. I mean, no one outside of official circles, unless an odd rumor leaks out through the stewards. And a certain man has no deaths to the name of his father's son, and the 1,000 never know. Think of it, you people who go down to the sea in floating palaces of steel and electric light, and let your benedictions fall silently upon the quiet, grave, neatly uniformed man in blue upon the bridge. You have trusted him unthinkingly with your lives, and not once in 10,000 times has he ever failed you. Do you understand better now? The Gateway of the Monster by William Hope Hodgson. In response to Carnackie's usual card of invitation to have dinner and listen to a story, I arrived promptly at 427 Chain Walk to find the 3 others who were always invited to these happy little times there before me. 5 minutes later, Carnackie, Arkwright, Jessup, Taylor, and I were all engaged in the pleasant occupation of dining. "You've not been long away this time," I remarked as I finished my soup, forgetting momentarily Carnackie's dislike of being asked even to skirt the borders of his story, until such time as he was ready. Then he would not stint words. "That's all," he replied with brevity, and I changed the subject, remarking that I had been buying a new gun, to which piece of news he gave an intelligent nod, and a smile which I think showed a genuinely good-humored appreciation of my intentional changing of the conversation. Later, when dinner was finished, Carnackie snugged himself comfortably down in his big chair, along with his pipe, and began his story, with very little circumlocution. "As Dodgson was remarking just now, I've only been away a short time, and for a very good reason, too. I've only been away a short distance. The exact locality, I am afraid, I must not tell you, but it is less than 20 miles from here. Though except for changing a name, that won't spoil the story. And it is a story, too. One of the most extraordinary things ever I have run against. I received a letter a fortnight ago from a man I must call Anderson, asking for an appointment. I arranged a time, and when he came, I found that he wished me to investigate and see whether I could not clear up a long-standing and too well, authenticated case of what he termed haunting. He gave me the very full particulars, and finally, as the case seemed to present something unique, I decided to take it up. 2 days later, I drove to the house late in the afternoon. I found it a very old place, standing quite alone in its own grounds. Anderson had left a letter with the butler, I found, pleading excuses for his absence, and leaving the whole house at my disposal for my investigations. The butler evidently knew the object of my visit, and I questioned him pretty thoroughly during dinner, which I had in a rather lonely state. He is an old and privileged servant, and had the history of the Grey Room exact in detail. From him I learned more particulars regarding 2 things that Anderson had mentioned in but a casual manner. The first was that the door of the Grey Room would be heard in the dead of night to open and slam heavily, and this even though the butler knew it was locked, and the key on the bunch in his pantry. The second was that the bedclothes would always be found torn off the bed and hurled in a heap into a corner. But it was the door slamming that chiefly bothered the old butler. Many and many a time, he told me, had he lain awake and just got shivering with fright, listening, for sometimes the door would be slammed, time after time, thud, 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 so that sleep was impossible. From Anderson I knew already that the room had a history extending back over 150 years. 3 people had been strangled in it, an ancestor of his and his wife and child. This is authentic, as I had taken very great pains to discover, so that you can imagine it was with the feeling I had a striking case to investigate that I went upstairs after dinner to have a look at the Grey Room. Peter, the old butler, was in rather a state about my going, and assured me with much solemnity that in all the 20 years of his service, no one had ever entered that room after nightfall. He begged me, in quite a fatherly way, to wait till the morning, when there would be no danger, and then he could accompany me himself. Of course, I smiled a little at him, and told him not to bother. I explained that I should do no more than look around a bit, and perhaps affix a few seals. He need not fear. I was used to that sort of thing. But he shook his head when I said that. "There isn't many ghosts like ours, sir," he assured me, with mournful pride. And by Jove, he was right, as you will see. I took a couple of candles, and Peter followed me with his bunch of keys. He unlocked the door, but he would not come inside with me. He was evidently in a fright, and he renewed his request that I would put off my examination until daylight. Of course, I laughed at him again, and told him he could stand sentry at the door, and catch anything that came out. "It never comes outside, sir," he said in his funny old solemn manner. Somehow, he managed to make me feel as if I were going to have the creeps right away. Anyway, it was one to him, you know. I left him there and examined the room. It is a big apartment, and well furnished in the grand style, with a huge 4-poster, which stands with its head to the end wall. There were 2 candles on the mantelpiece, and 2 on each of the 3 tables that were in the room. I lit the lot, and after that, the room felt a little less inhumanly dreary, though mind you, it was quite fresh, and well kept in every way. After I had taken a good look round, I sealed lengths of baby ribbon across the windows, along the walls, over the pictures, and over the fireplace and the wall closets. All the time as I worked, the butler stood just without the door, and I could not persuade him to enter, though I jested him a little as I stretched the ribbons and went here and there about my work. Every now and again he would say, "You'll excuse me, I'm sure, sir, but I do wish you would come out, sir. I'm fair in a quake for you." I told him he need not wait, but he was loyal enough in his way to what he considered his duty. He said he could not go away and leave me all alone there. He apologized, but made it very clear that I did not realize the danger of the room, and I could see, generally, that he was in a pretty frightened state. All the same, I had to make the room so that I should know if anything material entered it. So I asked him not to bother me, unless he really heard or saw something. He was beginning to get on my nerves, and the feel of the room was bad enough without making it any nastier. For a time further I worked, stretching ribbons across the floor and sealing them, so that the merest touch would have broken them, were anyone to venture into the room in that dark with the intention of playing the fool. All this had taken me far longer than I had anticipated, and suddenly I heard a clock strike 11. I had taken off my coat soon after commencing work. Now, however, as I had practically made an end of all that I intended to do, I walked across to the settee and picked it up. I was in the act of getting into it when the old butler's voice, he had not said a word for the last hour, came sharp and frightened. "Come out, sir, quick. There's something going to happen." Jove, but I jumped, and then in the same moment one of the candles on the table to the left went out. Now whether it was the wind or what, I do not know, but just for a moment I was enough startled to make a run for the door, though I am glad to say that I pulled up before I reached it. I simply could not bunk out with the butler standing there, after having, as it were, read him sort of a lesson on being brave, you know. So I just turned right round, picked up the 2 candles off the mantelpiece, and walked across to the table near the bed. Well, I saw nothing. I blew out the candle that was still alight, then I went to those on the 2 tables and blew them out. Then outside the door the old man called again. "Oh, sir, do be told, do be told." "All right, Peter," I said, and by Jove my voice was not as steady as I should have liked. I made for the door and had a bit of work not to start running. I took some thundering long strides, as you can imagine. Near the door I had a sudden feeling that there was a cold wind in the room. It was almost as if the window had been suddenly opened a little. I got to the door and the old butler gave back a step, in a sort of instinctive way. "Collar the candles, Peter," I said pretty sharply, and shoved them into his hands. I turned and caught the handle and slammed the door shut with a crash. Somehow, do you know, as I did so, I thought I felt something pull back on it, but it must have been only fancy. I turned the key in the lock and then again double-locking the door. I felt easier then, and set to and sealed the door. In addition, I put my card over the keyhole and sealed it there, after which I pocketed the key and went downstairs with Peter, who was nervous and silent, leading the way. Poor old beggar. It had not struck me until that moment that he had been enduring a considerable strain during the last 2 or 3 hours. About midnight I went to bed. My room lay at the end of the corridor upon which opens the door of the grey room. I counted the doors between it and mine, and found that 5 rooms lay between, and I am sure you can understand that I was not sorry. Then, just as I was beginning to undress, an idea came to me, and I took my candle and sealing wax, and sealed the doors of all 5 rooms. If any door slammed in the night, I should know just which one. I returned to my room, locked the door, and went to bed. I was waked suddenly from a deep sleep by a loud crash somewhere out in the passage. I sat up in bed and listened, but heard nothing. Then I lit my candle. I was in the very act of lighting it when there came the bang of a door being violently slammed along the corridor. I jumped out of bed and got my revolver. I unlocked the door and went out into the passage holding my candle high and keeping the pistol ready. Then a queer thing happened. I could not go a step toward the gray room. You all know I am not really a cowardly chap. I've gone into too many cases connected with ghostly things to be accused of that. But I tell you I funked it. I simply funked it. Just like any blessed kid. There was something precious unholy in the air that night. I ran back into my bedroom and shut and locked the door. Then I sat on the bed all night and listened to the dismal thudding of a door up the corridor. The sound seemed to echo through all the house. Daylight came at last and I washed and dressed. The door had not slammed for about an hour, and I was getting back my nerve again. I felt ashamed of myself, though. In some ways it was silly, for when you're meddling with that sort of thing, your nerve is bound to go sometimes, and you just have to sit quiet and call yourself a coward until daylight. Sometimes it is more than just cowardice, I fancy. I believe at times it is something warning you and fighting for you. But all the same, I always feel mean and miserable after a time like that. When the day came properly, I opened my door and, keeping my revolver handy, went quietly along the passage. I had to pass the head of the stairs along the way, and who should I see coming up but the old butler carrying a cup of coffee. He had merely tucked his nightshirt into his trousers, and he had an old pair of carpet slippers on. "Hello, Peter," I said, feeling suddenly cheerful, for I was as glad as any lost child to have a live human being close to me. "Where are you off to with the refreshments?" The old man gave a start and slopped some of the coffee. He stared up at me, and I could see that he looked white and done up. He came on up the stairs and held out the little tray to me. "I'm very thankful indeed, sir, to see you safe and well," he said. "I feared one time you might risk going into the gray room, sir. I've lain awake all night with the sound of the door, and when it came light I thought I'd make you a cup of coffee. I knew you'd want to look at the seals, and somehow it seems safer if there's two, sir." "Peter," I said, "you're a brick. This is very thoughtful of you," and I drank the coffee. "Come along," I told him, and handed him back the tray. "I'm going to have a look at what the brutes have been up to. I simply hadn't the pluck to in the night." "I'm very thankful, sir," he replied. "Flesh and blood can do nothing, sir, against devils, and that's what's in the gray room after dark." I examined the seals on all the doors as I went along, and found them right, but when I got to the gray room the seal was broken, though the card over the keyhole was untouched. I ripped it off and unlocked the door and went in, rather cautiously as you can imagine, but the whole room was empty of anything to frighten one, and there was heaps of light. I examined all my seals and not a single one was disturbed. The old butler had followed me in and suddenly he called out, "The bedclothes, sir." I ran up to the bed and looked over, and surely they were lying in the corner to the left of the bed. Jove, you can imagine how queer I felt. Something had been in the room. I stared for a while from the bed to the clothes on the floor. I had a feeling that I did not want to touch either. Old Peter, though, did not seem to be affected that way. He went over to the bed coverings and was going to pick them up, as doubtless he had done every day these 20 years back. But I stopped him. I wanted nothing touched until I had finished my examination. This I must have spent a full hour over, and then I let Peter straighten up the bed, after which we went out, and I locked the door for the room was getting on my nerves. I had a short walk and then breakfast, after which I felt more my own man, and so returned to the gray room, and with Peter's help and one of the maids, I had everything taken out of the room, except the bed, even the very pictures. I examined the walls, floor, and ceiling then, with probe, hammer, and magnifying glass, but found nothing suspicious, and I can assure you I began to realize in very truth that some incredible thing had been loose in the room during the past night. I sealed up everything again, and went out, locking and sealing the door, as before. After dinner, Peter and I unpacked some of my stuff, and I fixed up my camera and flashlight opposite to the door of the gray room, with a string from the trigger of the flashlight to the door. Then, you see, if the door were really opened, the flashlight would blare out, and there would be possibly a very queer picture to examine in the morning. The last thing I did before leaving was to uncap the lens, and after that I went off to my bedroom and to bed, for I intended to be up at midnight, and to ensure this, I set my little alarm to call me. Also, I left my candle burning. The clock woke me at 12, and I got up and into my dressing gown and slippers. I shoved my revolver into my right side pocket and opened my door. Then I lit my dark room lamp and withdrew the slide so that it would give a clear light. I carried it up the corridor about 30 feet and put it down on the floor. with the open side away from me so that it would show me anything that might approach along the dark passage. Then I went back and sat in the doorway of my room, with my revolver handy, staring up the passage toward the place where I knew my camera stood, outside the door of the gray room. I should think I had watched for about an hour and a half, when suddenly I heard a faint noise, away up the corridor. I was immediately conscious of a queer prickling sensation about the back of my head, and my hands began to sweat a little. The following instant the whole end of the passage flicked into sight in the abrupt glare of the flashlight. There came the succeeding darkness, and I peered nervously up the corridor, listening tensely, and trying to find what lay beyond the faint glow of my dark lamp, which now seemed ridiculously dim by contrast with the tremendous blaze of the flash power. And then, as I stooped forward, staring and listening, there came the crashing thud of the door of the gray room. The sound seemed to fill the whole of the large corridor, and go echoing hollowly through the house. I tell you I felt horrible, as if my bones were water, simply beastly. Jove, how did I stare, and how I listened. And then it came again, thud, 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 and then a silence that was almost worse than the noise of the door. For I kept fancying that some awful thing was stealing upon me along the corridor. And then suddenly my lamp was put out, and I could not see a yard before me. I realized all at once that I was doing a very silly thing, sitting there, and I jumped up. Even as I did so, I thought I heard a sound in the passage and quite near me. I made one backward spring into my room and slammed and locked the door. I sat on my bed and stared at the door. I had my revolver in my hand, but it seemed an abominably useless thing. I felt that there was something the other side of that door. For some unknown reason, I knew it was pressed up against the door, and it was soft. That was what I thought. Most extraordinary thing to think. Presently I got a hold of myself a bit, and marked out a pentacle, hurriedly with chalk on the polished floor, and there I sat in it, almost until dawn. And all the time away up the corridor the door of the gray room thudded, at solemn and horrid intervals. It was a miserable, brutal night. When the day began to break, the thudding of the door came gradually to an end, and at last I got hold of my courage, and went along the corridor in the half-light to cap the lens of my camera. I can tell you it took some doing, but if I had not done so, my photograph would have been spoilt, and I was tremendously keen to save it. I got back to my room and then set to and rubbed out the 5-pointed star in which I had been sitting. Half an hour later there was a tap at my door. It was Peter with my coffee. When I had drunk it, we both went along to the gray room. As we went, I had a look at the seals on the other doors, but they were untouched. The seal on the door of the gray room was broken, and also was the string from the trigger of the flashlight, but the card over the keyhole was still there. I ripped it off and opened the door. Nothing unusual was to be seen until we came to the bed. Then I saw that, as on the previous day, the bedclothes had been torn off and hurled into the left-hand corner, exactly where I had seen them before. I felt very queer, but I did not forget to look at all the seals, only to find that not one had been broken. Then I turned and looked at old Peter, and he looked at me, nodding his head. "Let's get out of here," I said. "It's no place for any living human to enter without proper protection." We went out, and I locked and sealed the door again. After breakfast I developed the negative, but it showed only the door of the gray room half opened. Then I left the house, as I wanted to get certain matters and implements that might be necessary to life, perhaps to the spirit, for I intended to spend the coming night in the gray room. I got back in the cab about 5:30 with my apparatus, and this, Peter and I carried up to the gray room, where I piled it carefully in the center of the floor. When everything was in the room, including a cat which I had brought, I locked and sealed the door and went toward the bedroom, telling Peter I should not be down for dinner. He said, "Yes, sir," and went downstairs thinking that I was going to turn in, which was what I wanted him to believe, as I knew he would have worried both me and himself if he had known what I intended. But I merely got my camera and flashlight from my bedroom and hurried back to the gray room. I locked and sealed myself in and set to work, for I had a lot to do before it got dark. First I cleared away all the ribbons across the floor, then I carried the cat, still fastened in its basket, over toward the far wall and left it. I returned then to the center of the room and measured out a space of 21 feet in diameter, which I swept with a broom of hyssop. About this I drew a circle of chalk, taking care never to step over the circle. Beyond this I smudged with a bunch of garlic, a broad belt right around the chalked circle, and when this was complete, I took from among my stores in the center of a small jar of a certain water. I broke away the parchment and withdrew the stopper. Then, dipping my left forefinger in the little jar, I went round the circle again, making upon the floor just within the line of chalk the second sign of the Sama ritual, and joining each sign most carefully with the left-handed crescent. I can tell you I felt easier when this was done and the water circle complete. Then I unpacked some more of the stuff that I had brought and placed a lighted candle in the valley of each crescent. After that I drew a pentacle so that each of the 5 points of the defensive star touched the chalk circle. In the 5 points of the star I placed 5 portions of the bread, each wrapped in linen, and in the 5 veils, 5 open jars of the water I had used to make the water circle. And now I had my first protective barrier complete. Now anyone except you who knows something of my methods of investigation might consider all this a piece of useless and foolish superstition, but you all remember the black veil case, in which I believe my life was saved by a very similar form of protection, whilst Astor, who sneered at it and would not come inside, died. I got the idea from the Sigsand manuscript, written, so far as I can make out, in the 14th century. At first, naturally, I imagined it was just an expression of the superstition of his time, and it was not until a year later that it occurred to me to test his defense, which I did, as I've just said, in that horrible black veil business. You know how that turned out. Later, I used it several times, and always I came through safe, until the moving fur case. It was only a partial defense, therefore, and I nearly died in the pentacle. After that, I came across Professor Gardner's experiments with a medium. When they surrounded the medium with a current in vacuum, he lost his power, almost as if it cut him off from the immaterial. That made me think a lot, and that is how I came to make the electric pentacle, which is the most marvelous defense against certain manifestations. I used the shape of the defensive star for this protection because I have, personally, no doubt at all but that there is some extraordinary virtue in the old magic figure. Curious thing for a 20th century man to admit, is it not? But then, as you all know, I never did and never will allow myself to be blinded by the little cheap laughter. I ask questions and keep my eyes open. In this last case, I had little doubt that I had run up against a supernatural monster, and I meant to take every possible care, for the danger is abominable. I turned now to fit the electric pentacle, setting it so that each of its points and veils coincided exactly with the points and veils of the drawn pentagram upon the floor. Then I connected up the battery, and the next instant the pale blue glare from the intertwining vacuum tubes shone out. I glanced about me then with something of a sigh of relief, and realized suddenly that the dusk was upon me, for the window was gray and unfriendly. Then round at the big, empty room, over the double barrier of electric and candlelight. I had an abrupt, extraordinary sense of weirdness thrust upon me. In the air, you know, as it were, a sense of something inhuman impending. The room was full of the stench of bruised garlic, a smell I hate. I turned now to the camera, and saw that it and the flashlight were in order. Then I tested my revolver carefully, though I had little thought that it would be needed. Yet to what extent materialization of an ab-natural creature is possible, given favorable conditions, no one can say. And I had no idea what horrible thing I was going to see, or feel the presence of. I might, in the end, have to fight with a materialized monster. I did not know, and could only be prepared. You see, I never forgot that 3 other people had been strangled in the bed close to me, and the fierce slamming of the door I had heard myself. I had no doubt that I was investigating a dangerous and ugly case. By this time the night had come, though the room was very light with the burning candles, and I found myself glancing behind me constantly, and then all round the room. It was nervy work waiting for that thing to come. Then suddenly, I was aware of a little, cold wind sweeping over me, coming from behind. I gave one great nerve thrill, and a prickly feeling went all over the back of my head. Then I hove myself round, with a sort of stiff jerk, and stared straight against that queer wind. It seemed to come from the corner of the room to the left of the bed, the place where both times I had found the heap of tossed bedclothes, yet I could see nothing unusual, no opening, no nothing. Abruptly I was aware that the candles were all a-flicker in that unnatural wind. I believe I just squatted there and stared in a horribly frightened, wooden way for some minutes. I shall never be able to let you know how disgustingly horrible it was sitting in that vile cold wind. And then flick, 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 all the candles round the outer barrier went out, and there was I locked and sealed in that room, and with no light beyond the weakish blue glare of the electric pentacle. A time of abominable tenseness passed, and still that wind blew upon me, and then suddenly I knew that something stirred in the corner to the left of the bed. I was made conscious of it, rather by some inward, unused sense than by either sight or sound, for the pale, short-radius glare of the pentacle gave but a very poor light for seeing by. Yet as I stared, something began slowly to grow upon my sight, a moving shadow, a little darker than the surrounding shadows. I lost the thing amid the vagueness, and for a moment or two, I glanced swiftly from side to side, with a fresh, new sense of impending danger. Then my attention was directed to the bed. All the coverings were being drawn steadily off, with a hateful, stealthy sort of motion. I heard the slow, dragging slither of the clothes, but I could see nothing of the thing that pulled. I was aware in a funny, subconscious, introspective fashion that the creep had come upon me, yet I was cooler mentally than I had been for some minutes, sufficiently so to feel that my hands were sweating coldly, and to shift my revolver, half-consciously, whilst I rubbed my right hand dry upon my knee, though never for an instant taking my gaze or my attention from those moving clothes. The faint noises from the bed ceased once, and there was a most intense silence, with only the sound of the blood beating in my head. Yet immediately afterward, I heard again the slurring of the bedclothes being dragged off the bed. In the midst of my nervous tension, I remembered the camera, and reached round for it, but without looking away from the bed. And then, all in a moment, the whole of the bed coverings were torn off with extraordinary violence, and I heard the flump they made as they were hurled into the corner. There was a time of absolute quietness then for perhaps a couple of minutes, and you can imagine how horrible I felt. The bedclothes had been thrown with such savageness, and then again the brutal unnaturalness of the thing that had just been done before me. Abruptly over by the door I heard a faint noise, a sort of crickling sound, and then a pitter or two upon the floor. A great nervous thrill swept over me, seeming to run up my spine and over the back of my head, for the seal that secured the door had just been broken. Something was there. I could not see the door, at least. I mean to say that it was impossible to say how much I actually saw, and how much my imagination supplied. Something was there. I could not see the door, at least I mean to say that it was impossible to say how much I actually saw, and how much my imagination supplied. I made it out, only as a continuation of the gray walls, and then it seemed to me that something dark and indistinct moved and wavered there among the shadows. Abruptly I was aware that the door was opening, and with an effort I reached again for my camera. But before I could aim it, the door was slammed with a terrific crash that filled the whole room with a sort of hollow thunder. I jumped, like a frightened child. There seemed such a power behind the noise, as though a vast, wanton force were out. Can you understand? The door was not touched again, but directly afterward, I heard the basket in which the cat lay creak. I tell you, I fairly pringled all along my back. I knew that I was going to learn definitely whether whatever was abroad was dangerous to life. From the cat there rose suddenly a hideous caterwaul that ceased abruptly, and then too late I snapped off the flashlight. In the great glare I saw that the basket had been overturned, and the lid was wrenched open, with the cat lying half in and half out upon the floor. I saw nothing else, but I was full of knowledge that I was in the presence of some being or thing that had power to destroy. During the next 2 or 3 minutes there was an odd, noticeable quietness in the room, and you must remember I was half blinded for the time because of the flashlight, so that the whole place seemed to be pitchy dark just beyond the shine of the pentacle. I tell you, it was most horrible. I just knelt there in the star and whirled round trying to see whether anything was coming at me. My power of sight came gradually, and I got a little hold of myself, and abruptly I saw the thing I was looking for close to the water circle. It was big and indistinct, and wavered curiously as though the shadow of a vast spider hung suspended in the air just beyond the barrier. It passed swiftly round the circle, and seemed to probe ever toward me, but only to draw back with extraordinary jerky movements, as might a living person if they touched the hot bar of a grate. Round and round it moved, and round I turned. Then just opposite to one of the veils in the pentacles, it seemed to pause, as though preliminary to a tremendous effort. It retired almost beyond the glow of the vacuum light, and then came straight toward me, appearing to gather form and solidity as it came. There seemed a vast, malign determination behind the movement that must succeed. I was on my knees, and I jerked back, falling onto my left hand and hip, in a wild endeavor to get back from the advancing thing. With my right hand I was grabbing madly for my revolver, which I had let slip. The brutal thing came with one great sweep straight over the garlic and the water circle, almost to the veil of the pentacle. I believe I yelled. Then just as suddenly as it had swept over, it seemed to be hurled back by some mighty invisible force. It must have been some moments before I realized that I was safe, and then I got myself together in the middle of the pinnacles, feeling horribly gone and shaken, and glancing round and round the barrier, but the thing had vanished. Yet I had learned something, for I knew now that the gray room was haunted by a monstrous hand. Suddenly, as I crouched there, I saw what had so nearly given the monster an opening through the barrier. In my movements with the pentacle, I must have touched one of the jars of water, for just where the thing had made its attack, the jar that guarded the deep of the veil had been moved to one side, and this had left one of the 5 doorways unguarded. I put it back quickly and felt almost safe again, for I had found the cause, and the defense was still good. I began to hope again that I should see the morning come in. When I saw that thing so nearly succeed, I had an awful, weak, overwhelming feeling that the barriers could never bring me safe through the night against such a force. You can understand. For a long time, I could not see the hand, but presently I thought I saw once or twice an odd wavering over among the shadows near the door. A little later, as though in a sudden fit of malignant rage, the dead body of the cat was picked up and beaten with dull, sickening blows against the solid floor. That made me feel rather queer. A minute afterward, the door was opened and slammed twice with tremendous force. The next instant, the thing made one swift, vicious dart at me from out of the shadows. Instinctively, I started sideways from it, and so plucked my hand from upon the electric pentacle, where for a wicked, careless moment I had placed it. The monster was hurled off from the neighborhood of the pentacles, though owing to my inconceivable foolishness, it had been enabled for a second time to pass the outer barriers. I can tell you I shook for a time with sheer funk. I moved right to the center of the pentacles again. I knelt there, making myself as small and compact as possible. As I knelt, there came to me presently a vague wonder at the 2 accidents which had so nearly allowed the brute to get at me. Was I being influenced to unconscious voluntary actions that endangered me? The thought took hold of me, and I watched my every movement. Abruptly, I stretched a tired leg and knocked over one of the jars of water. Some spilled, but because of my suspicious watchfulness, I had it upright and back within the veil, while yet some of the water remained. Even as I did so, the vast, black, half-materialized hand beat up at me out of the shadows, and seemed to leap almost into my face. So nearly did it approach, but for the 3rd time it was thrown back by some altogether enormous, overmastering force. Yet apart from the dazed fright in which it left me, I had for a moment that feeling of spiritual sickness, as if some delicate, beautiful inward grace had suffered, which is felt only upon the too near approach of the abhuman, and is more dreadful, in a strange way, than any physical pain that can be suffered. I knew by this more of the extent and closeness of the danger, and for a long time I was simply cowed by the butt-headed brutality of that force upon my spirit. I can put it no other way. I knelt again in the center of the pentacles, watching myself with more fear almost than the monster, for I knew now that unless I guarded myself from every sudden impulse that came to me, I might simply work my own destruction. Do you see how horrible it all was? I spent the rest of the night in a haze of sick fright, and so tense that I could not make a single movement naturally. I was in such fear that any desire for action that came to me might be prompted by the influence that I knew was at work on me. And outside of the barrier that ghastly thing went round and round, grabbing and grabbing in the air at me. Twice more was the body of the dead cat molested. The second time I heard every bone in its body scrunch and crack, and all the time the horrible wind was blowing upon me from the corner of the room to the left of the bed. Then, just as the first touch of dawn came into the sky, that unnatural wind ceased in a single moment, and I could see no sign of the hand. The dawn came slowly, and presently the wan light filled all the room, and made the pale glare of the electric pentacle look more unearthly. Yet it was not until the day had fully come that I made any attempt to leave the barrier, for I did not know but that there was some method abroad, in the sudden stopping of that wind, to entice me from the pentacles. At last, when dawn was strong and bright, I took one last look round and ran for the door. I got it unlocked in a nervous and clumsy fashion, and then locked it hurriedly and went to my bedroom, where I lay on the bed and tried to steady my nerves. Peter came presently with the coffee, and when I had drunk it I told him I meant to have a sleep, as I had been up all night. He took the tray and went out quietly, and after I had locked my door I turned in properly, and at last got to sleep. I woke about midday, and after some lunch went up to the gray room. I switched off the current from the pentacle which I had left on in my hurry. Also I removed the body of the cat. You can understand I did not want anyone to see the poor brute. After that, I made a very careful search of the corner where the bedclothes had been thrown. I made several holes and probed, and found nothing. Then it occurred to me to try with my instrument under the skirting. I did so and heard my wire ring on metal. I turned the hook end that way and fished for the thing. At the second go, I got it. It was a small object, and I took it to the window. I found it to be a curious ring made of some graying material. The curious thing about it was that it was made in the form of a pentagon. That is, the same shape as the inside of the magic pentacle, but without the mounts, which form the points of the defensive star. It was free from all chasing or engraving. You will understand that I was excited when I tell you that I felt sure I had in my hand the famous luck ring of the Anderson family, which indeed was of all things the one most intimately connected with the history of the haunting. This ring was handed on from father to son through generations, and always in obedience to some ancient family tradition. Each son had to promise never to wear the ring. The ring, I may say, was brought home by one of the Crusaders under very peculiar circumstances, but the story is too long to go into here. It appears that young Sir Hulbert, an ancestor of Anderson's, made a bet in drink, that he would wear the ring that night. He did so, and in the morning his wife and child were found strangled in the bed in the very room in which I stood. Many people, it would seem, thought young Sir Hulbert was guilty of having done this thing in drunken anger, and he, in an attempt to prove his innocence, slept a second night in the room. He also was strangled. Since then, as you may imagine, no one has ever spent a night in the gray room until I did so. The ring had been lost so long that it had become almost a myth, and it was most extraordinary to stand there with the actual thing in my hand, as you can understand. It was whilst I stood there, looking at the ring, that I got an idea, supposing that it were, in a way, a doorway. You see what I mean? A sort of gap in the world hedge. It was a queer idea, I know, and probably was not my own, but came to me from the outside. You see, the wind had come from that part of the room where the ring lay. I thought a lot about it. Then the shape, the inside of a pentacle. It had no mounts, and without mounts, as the Sigsand manuscript has it, the mounts which are the 5 hills of safety. To lack is to give power to the demon, and surely to favor the evil thing. You see, the very shape of the ring was significant, and I determined to test it. I unmade the pentacle, for it must be made afresh and around the one to be protected. Then I went out and locked the door, after which I left the house to get certain matters, for neither yarbs nor fire nor ware must be used a second time. I returned about 7:30, and as soon as the things I had brought had been carried up to the gray room, I dismissed Peter for the night just as I had done the evening before. When he had gone downstairs, I let myself into the room and locked and sealed the door. I went to the place in the center of the room where all the stuff had been packed and set to work with all my speed to construct a barrier about me and the ring. I do not remember whether I explained it to you, but I had reasoned that if the ring were in any way a medium of admission, and it were enclosed with me in the electric pentacle, it would be, to express it loosely, insulated. Do you see? The force, which had visible expression as a hand, would have to stay beyond the barrier, which separates the ab from the normal, for the gateway would be removed from accessibility. As I was saying, I worked with all my speed to get the barrier completed about me and the ring, for it was already later than I cared to be in that room unprotected. Also, I had a feeling that there would be a vast effort made that night to regain the use of the ring, for I had the strongest conviction that the ring was a necessity to materialization. You will see whether I was right. I completed the barriers in about an hour, and you can imagine something of the relief I felt when I felt the pale glare of the electric pentacle once more all about me. From then onward, for about 2 hours, I sat quietly facing the corner from which the wind came. About 11 o'clock, a queer knowledge came that something was near to me, yet nothing happened for a whole hour after that. Then suddenly I felt the cold, queer wind begin to blow upon me. To my astonishment, it seemed now to come from behind me, and I whipped round with a hideous quake of fear. The wind met me in the face. It was blowing up from the floor close to me. I stared down in a sickening maze of new frights. What on earth had I done now? The ring was there close beside me where I had put it. Suddenly, as I stared bewildered, I was aware that there was something queer about the ring. Funny, shadowy movements and convolutions. I looked at them stupidly, and then abruptly I knew that the wind was blowing up at me from the ring. A queer, indistinct smoke became visible to me, seeming to pour upward through the ring and mix with the moving shadows. Suddenly, I realized that I was in more than any mortal danger. for the convoluting shadows about the ring were taking shape, and the death hand was forming within the pinnacle. My goodness, do you realize it? I had brought the gateway into the pinnacles, and the brute was coming through, pouring into the material world as gas might pour out from the mouth of a pipe. I should think that I knelt for a moment in a sort of stunned fright. Then, with a mad, awkward movement, I snatched at the ring, intending to hurl it out of the pentacle. Yet it eluded me, as though some invisible living thing jerked it hither and thither. At last I gripped it, yet in the same instant it was torn from my grasp with incredible and brutal force. A great black shadow covered it, and rose into the air and came at me. I saw that it was the hand, vast and nearly perfect in form. I gave one crazy yell and jumped over the pinnacle of the ring of burning candles, and ran despairingly for the door. I fumbled idiotically and ineffectually with the key, and all the time I stared with a fear that was like insanity toward the barriers. The hand was plunging toward me, yet even as it had been unable to pass into the pinnacle when the ring was without, so now that the ring was within, it had no power to pass out. The monster was chained as surely as any beast would be, were chains riveted upon it. Even then I got a flash of this knowledge, but I was too utterly shaken with fright to reason. And the instant I managed to get the key turned, I sprang into the passage and slammed the door with a crash. I locked it and got to my room somehow, for I was trembling so that I could hardly stand, as you can imagine. I locked myself in and managed to get the candle lit. Then I lay down on my bed and kept quiet for an hour or two, and so I got steadied. I got a little sleep later, but woke when Peter brought my coffee. When I had drunk it, I felt altogether better, and took the old man along with me whilst I had a look into the grey room. I opened the door and peeped in. The candles were still burning, wan against the daylight, and behind them was the pale, glowing star of the electric pinnacle. And there in the middle was the ring, the gateway of the monster, lying demure and ordinary. Nothing in the room was touched, and I knew that the brute had never managed to cross the pinnacles. Then I went out and locked the door. After a sleep of some hours, I left the house. I returned in the afternoon in a cab. I had with me an oxyhydrogen jet and 2 cylinders containing the gases. I carried the things into the grey room, and there, in the center of the electric pentacle, I erected the little furnace. 5 minutes later, the luck ring, once the luck, but now the bane of the Anderson family, was no more than a little solid splash of hot metal. Carnacki felt in his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. He passed it to me. I opened it and found a small circle of grayish metal, something like lead, only harder and rather brighter. "Well?" I asked at length, after examining it and handing it round to the others. "Did that stop the haunting?" Carnacki nodded. "Yes," he said. "I slept 3 nights in the grey room before I left. Old Peter nearly fainted when he knew that I meant to, but by the 3rd night he seemed to realize that the house was just safe and ordinary. And you know, I believe in his heart he hardly approved." Carnacki stood up and began to shake hands. "Out you go," he said genially, and presently we went, pondering, to our various homes. The House Among the Laurels, by William Hope Hodgson. "This is a curious yarn that I am going to tell you," said Carnacki, as after a quiet little dinner we made ourselves comfortable in his cozy dining room. "I have just got back from the west of Ireland," he continued. "Wentworth, a friend of mine, has lately had rather an unexpected legacy, in the shape of a large estate and manor, about 1.5 miles outside the village of Corrington. This place is named Gannington Manor, and has been empty a great number of years, as you will find is almost always the case with houses reputed to be haunted, as it is usually termed. It seems that when Wentworth went over to take possession, he found the place in very poor repair, and the estate totally uncared for, and as I know, looking very desolate and lonesome generally. He went through the big house by himself, and he admitted to me that it had an uncomfortable feeling about it. But of course, that might be nothing more than the natural dismalness of a big, empty house, which has been long uninhabited, and through which you are wandering alone. When he had finished his look round, he went down to the village, meaning to see the one-time agent of the estate, and arrange for someone to go in as caretaker. The agent, who proved, by the way, to be a Scotchman, was very willing to take up the management of the estate once more, but he assured Wentworth that they would get no one to go in as caretaker, and that his, the agent's advice, was to have the house pulled down and a new one built. This naturally astonished my friend, and as they went down to the village, he managed to get a sort of explanation from the man. It seems that there had been always curious stories told about the place, which in the early days was called Landrew Castle, and that within the last 7 years there had been 2 extraordinary deaths there. In each case they had been tramps who were ignorant of the reputation of the house, and had probably thought the big empty place suitable for a night's free lodging. There had been absolutely no signs of violence to indicate the method by which death was caused, and on each occasion the body had been found in the great entrance hall. By this time they had reached the inn where Wentworth had put up, and he told the agent that he would prove that it was all rubbish about the haunting by staying a night or 2 in the manor himself. The death of the tramps was certainly curious, but did not prove that any supernatural agency had been at work. They were but isolated accidents, spread over a large number of years by the memory of the villagers, which was natural enough in a little place like Corrington. Tramps had to die sometime, and in some place, and it proved nothing that 2, out of possibly hundreds who had slept in the empty house, had happened to take the opportunity to die under shelter. But the agent took his remark very seriously, and both he and Dennis, the landlord of the inn, tried their best to persuade him not to go. For his soul's sake, Irish Dennis begged him to do no such thing, and because of his life's sake, the Scotchman was equally in earnest. It was late afternoon at the time, and as Wentworth told me, it was warm and bright, and it seemed such utter rot to hear those 2 talking seriously about the impossible. He felt full of pluck, and he made up his mind he would smash the story of the haunting at once by staying that very night in the manor. He made this quite clear to them, and told them that it would be more to the point and to their credit if they offered to come up along with him and keep him company. But poor old Dennis was quite shocked, I believe, at the suggestion, and though Tabbitt, the agent, took it more quietly, he was very solemn about it. It seems that Wentworth did go, and though, as he said to me, when the evening began to come, it seemed a very different sort of thing to tackle. A whole crowd of the villagers assembled to see him off, for by this time they all knew of his intention. Wentworth had his gun with him, and a big packet of candles, and he made it clear to them all that it would not be wise for anyone to play any tricks, as he intended to shoot at sight. And then, he got a hint of how serious they considered the whole thing, for one of them came up to him, leading a great bull mastiff, and offered it to him to take to keep him company. Wentworth patted his gun, but the old man who owned the dog shook his head and explained that the brute might warn him in sufficient time for him to get away from the castle, for it was obvious that he did not consider the gun would prove of any use. Wentworth took the dog and thanked the man. He told me that already he was beginning to wish that he had not said definitely that he would go, but as it was, he was simply forced to. He went through the crowd of men and found suddenly that they had all turned in a body and were keeping him company. They stayed with him all the way to the manor, and then went right over the whole place with him. It was still daylight when this was finished, though turning to dusk, and for a while the men stood about, hesitating, as if they felt ashamed to go away and leave Wentworth there all alone. He told me that by this time he would gladly have given £50 to be going back with them, and then abruptly an idea came to him. He suggested that they should stay with him and keep him company through the night. For a time they refused, and tried to persuade him to go back with them, but finally he made a proposition that got home to them all. He planned that they should all go back to the inn, and there get a couple of dozen bottles of whiskey, a donkey load of turf and wood, and some more candles. Then they would come back and make a great fire in the big fireplace, light all the candles, and put them round the place, open the whiskey, and make a night of it. And by Jove, he got them to agree. They set off back and were soon at the inn, and here, whilst the donkey was being loaded and the candles and whiskey distributed, Dennis was doing his best to keep Wentworth from going back, but he was a sensible man in his way, for when he found that it was no use, he stopped. You see, he did not want to frighten the others from accompanying Wentworth. "I'll tell ye, sir," he told him, "'tis of no use at all, thryin' to reclaim their castle. 'Tis cursed with innocent blood, and you'll be better pulling it down and building a new fine one. But if ye be intended to stay this night, keep the big door open wide and watch for the blood drip. If so much as a single drip falls, don't stay through all the gold in the world was offered ye." Wentworth asked him what he meant by the blood drip. "Sure," he said, "'tis the blood of Thim, as old Black Mick way back in the old days kilt in a schlape. 'Twas a feud as he pretended to patch up, and he invited them, the O'Haras they was, 70 of them, and he fed them, and spoke soft to them, and them trusting him, stayed to slape with him. Then, he and them with him, started in and murdered them. was an all as they slept. 'Tis from thee father's grandfather ye have the story, and since then 'tis death to any, so they say. To pass the night in the castle with the blood drip comes. 'Twill put out candle and fire, and then in darkness the Virgin herself would be powerless to protect ye. Wentworth told me he laughed at this, chiefly because, as he put it, one always must laugh at that sort of yarn, however it makes you feel inside. He asked old Dennis whether he expected him to believe it. Yes, sir, said Dennis. I do mean to believe it, and please God, if you'll believe it, ye may be back safe before morning. The man's serious simplicity took hold of Wentworth, and he held out his hand. But for all that he went, and I must admire his pluck. There were now about 40 men, and when they got back to the manor, or castle as the villagers always call it, they were not long in getting a big fire going, and lighted candles all around the great hall. They had all brought sticks, so that they would have been a pretty formidable lot to tackle by anything simply physical, and of course Wentworth had his gun. He kept the whiskey in his own charge, for he intended to keep them sober, but he gave them a good strong tot all round first, so as to make things seem cheerful, and to get them yearning. If you once let a crowd of men like that grow silent, they begin to think, and then to fancy things. The big entrance door had been left wide open by his orders, which shows that he had taken some notice of Dennis. It was a quiet night, so this did not matter, for the lights kept steady, and all went on in a jolly sort of fashion for about 3 hours. He had opened a second lot of bottles, and everyone was feeling cheerful, so much so that one of the men called out aloud to the ghosts to come out and show themselves. And then, a very extraordinary thing happened, for the ponderous main door swung quietly and steadily too, as though pushed by an invisible hand, and shut with a sharp click. Wentworth stared, feeling suddenly rather chilly. Then he remembered the men and looked round at them. Several had ceased their talk and were staring in a frightened way at the big door, but the great number had never noticed and were talking and yarning. He reached for his gun, and the following instant the great bull mastiff set up a tremendous barking, which drew the attention of the whole company. The hall, I should tell you, is oblong. The south wall is all windows, but the north and east have rows of doors leading into the house, whilst the west wall is occupied by the great entrance. The rows of doors leading into the house were all closed, and it was toward one of these in the north wall that the big dog ran. Yet he would not go very close, and suddenly the door began to move slowly open, until the blackness of the passage beyond was shown. The dog came back among the men, whimpering, and for a minute there was an absolute silence. Then Wentworth went out from the men a little, and aimed his gun at the doorway. "Whoever is there, come out or I shall fire," he shouted, but nothing came, and he blazed forth both barrels into the dark. As though the report had been a signal, all the doors along the north and east walls moved slowly open, and Wentworth and his men were staring, frightened into the black shapes of the empty doorways. Wentworth loaded his gun quickly and called to the dog, but the brute was burrowing away in among the men, and this fear on the dog's part frightened Wentworth more, he told me, than anything. Then something else happened. 3 of the candles over in the corner of the hall went out, and immediately about half a dozen in different parts of the place. More candles were put out, and the hall had become quite dark in the corners. The men were all standing now holding their clubs and crowded together, and no one said a word. Wentworth told me he felt positively ill with fright. I know the feeling. Then suddenly something splashed on the back of his left hand. He lifted it and looked. It was covered with a great splash of red that dripped from his fingers. An old Irishman near him saw it and croaked out in a quivering voice, "The blood drip!" When the old man called out, they all looked, and in the same instant others felt it upon them. There were frightened cries of, "The blood drip! The blood drip!" And then about a dozen candles went out simultaneously, and the hall was suddenly dark. The dog let out a great mournful howl, and there was a horrible little silence, with everyone standing rigid. Then the tension broke, and there was a mad rush for the main door. They wrenched it open and tumbled out into the dark, but something slammed it with a crash after them and shut the dog in, for Wentworth heard it howling as they raced down the drive. Yet no one had the pluck to go back to let it out, which does not surprise me. Wentworth sent for me the following day. He had heard of me in connection with that steeple monster case. I arrived by the night mail and put up with Wentworth at the inn. The next day we went up to the old manor, which certainly lies in a rather wilderness, though what struck me most was the extraordinary number of laurel bushes around the house. The place was smothered with them, so that the house seemed to be growing up out of a sea of green laurel. These and the grim ancient look of the old building made the place look a bit dank and ghostly, even by daylight. The hall was a big place, and well lit by daylight, for which I was not sorry. You see, I had been rather wound up by Wentworth's yarn. We found one rather funny thing, and that was the great bull mastiff lying stiff with its neck broken. This made me feel very serious, for it showed that whether the cause was supernatural or not, there was present in the house some force exceedingly dangerous to life. Later, whilst Wentworth stood guard with his shotgun, I made an examination of the hall. The bottles and mugs from which the men had drunk their whiskey were scattered about, and all over the place were the candles stuck upright in their own grease. But in the somewhat brief and general search, I found nothing, and decided to begin my usual exact examination of every square foot of the place, not only of the hall, in this case, but of the whole interior of the castle. I spent 3 uncomfortable weeks searching, but without result of any kind, and you know the care I take at this period is extreme, for I have solved hundreds of cases of so-called hauntings at this early stage, simply by the most minute investigation and the keeping of a perfectly open mind. But as I have said, I found nothing. During the whole of the examination, I got Wentworth to stand guard with his loaded shotgun, and I was very particular that we were never caught there after dusk. I decided now to make the experiment of staying a night in the great hall, of course protected. I spoke about it to Wentworth, but his own attempt had made him so nervous that he begged me to do no such thing. However, I thought it well worth the risk, and I managed in the end to persuade him to be present. With this in view, I went to the neighboring town of Gaunt, and by an arrangement with the chief constable I obtained the services of 6 policemen with their rifles. The arrangement was unofficial, of course, and the men were allowed to volunteer with a promise of payment. When the constables arrived early that evening at the inn, I gave them a good feed, and after that we all set out for the manor. We had 4 donkeys with us, loaded with fuel and other matters, also 2 great boarhounds, which one of the police led. When we reached the house, I set the men to unload the donkeys, whilst Wentworth and I set to and sealed all the doors, except the main entrance, with tape and wax. For if the doors were really opened, I was going to be sure of the fact. I was going to run no risk of being deceived by ghostly hallucination or mesmeric influence. By the time that this was done, the policemen had unloaded the donkeys and were waiting, looking about them curiously. I set 2 of them to lay a fire in the big grate, and the others I used as I required them. I took one of the boarhounds to the end of the hall furthest from the entrance, and there I drove a staple into the floor to which I tied the dog with a short tether. Then round him I drew upon the floor the figure of a pentacle in chalk. Outside of the pentacle I made a circle with garlic. I did exactly the same thing with the other hound, but over more in the northeast corner of the big hall, where the 2 rows of doors make the angle. When this was done, I cleared the whole center of the hall and put one of the policemen to sweep it, after which I had all my apparatus carried into the cleared space. Then I went over to the main door and hooked it open, so that the hook would have to be lifted out of the hasp before the door could be closed. After that, I placed lighted candles before each of the sealed doors, and one in each corner of the big room, and then I lit the fire. When I saw that it was properly alight, I got all of the men together by the pile of things in the center of the room and took their pipes from them. For as the Sigsand manuscript has it, there must no light come from within the barrier, and I was going to make sure. I got my tape measure then, and measured out a circle 30 feet in diameter, and immediately chalked it out. The police in Wentworth were tremendously interested, and I took the opportunity to warn them that this was no piece of silly mumming on my part, but done with definite intention of erecting a barrier between us and any abhuman thing that the night might show us. I warned them that as they valued their lives, and more than their lives it might be, no one must on any account whatsoever pass beyond the limits of the barrier that I was making. After I had drawn the circle, I took a bunch of the garlic and smudged it right round the chalk circle, a little outside of it. When this was complete, I called for candles from my stock of material. I set the police to lighting them, and as they were lit, I took them and sealed them down to the floor just within the chalk circle 5 inches apart. As each candle measured approximately 1 inch in diameter, it took 66 candles to complete the circle, and I need hardly say that every number and measurement has a significance. Then from candle to candle I took a gayrd of human hair, entwining it alternately to the left and to the right, until the circle was completed, and by the ends of the hair shod with silver, and pressed into the wax of the 66th candle. It had now been dark some time, and I made haste to get the defense complete. To this end I got the men well together, and began to fit the electric pentacle right around us, so that the 5 points of the defensive star came just within the hair circle. This did not take me long, and a minute later I had connected up the batteries, and the weak blue glare of the intertwining vacuum tubes shone all around us. I felt happier then, for this pentacle is, as you all know, a wonderful defense. I have told you before how the idea came to me after reading Professor Gardner's experiments with a medium. He found that a current of a certain number of vibrations in vacuo insulated the medium. It is difficult to suggest an explanation non-technically, and if you are really interested, you should read Carter's lecture on astral vibrations compared with Matero involuted vibrations below the 6 billion limit. As I stood up from my work, I could hear outside in the night a constant drip from the Laurels, which, as I have said, come right up around the house very thick. By the sound, I knew that a soft rain had set in, and there was absolutely no wind, as I could tell by the steady flame of the candles. I stood a moment or two listening, and then one of the men touched my arm and asked me in a low voice what they should do. By his tone, I could tell that he was feeling something of the strangeness of it all, and the other men, including Wentworth, were so quiet that I was afraid they were beginning to get shaky. I set to then, and arranged them with their backs to one common center, so that they were sitting flat upon the floor with their feet radiating outward. Then by compass, I laid their legs to the 8 chief points, and afterward I drew a circle with chalk around them, and opposite to their feet I made the 8 signs of the Sama ritual. The 8th place was, of course, empty, but ready for me to occupy at any moment, for I had omitted to make the sealing sign to that point until I had finished all my preparations and could enter the inner star. I took a last look round the great hall and saw that the 2 big hounds were lying quietly, with their noses between their paws. The fire was big and cheerful, and the candles before the 2 rows of doors burnt steadily, as well as the solitary ones in the corners. Then I went round the little star of men and warned them not to be frightened whatever happened, but to trust the defense, and to let nothing tempt or drive them to cross the barriers. Also, I told them to watch their movements, and to keep their feet strictly to their places. For the rest, there was to be no shooting unless I gave the word. And now at last I went to my place, and sitting down made the 8th sign just beyond my feet. Then I arranged my camera and flashlight handy and examined my revolver. Wentworth sat behind the first sign, and as the numbering went round reversed, that put him next to me on my left. I asked him in a low voice how he felt, and he told me rather nervous, but that he felt confidence in my knowledge, and was resolved to go through with the matter whatever happened. We settled down to wait. There was no talking, except that once or twice the police bent toward one another, and whispered odd remarks concerning the hall, that appeared queerly audible in the intense silence. But in a while there was not even a whisper from anyone, and only the monotonous drip-drip of the quiet rain without the great entrance, and the low, dull sound of the fire in the big fireplace. It was a queer group that we made sitting there, back to back, with our legs starred outward, and all around us the strange blue glow of the pentacle, and beyond that the brilliant shining of the great ring of lighted candles. Outside of the glare of the candles, the large empty hall looked a little gloomy by contrast, except where the lights shone before the sealed doors, and the blaze of the big fire made a good honest mass of flame. And the feeling of mystery, can you picture it all? It might have been an hour later that it came to me suddenly that I was aware of an extraordinary sense of dreeness, as it were, come into the air of the place. Not the nervous feeling of mystery that had been with us all the time, but a new feeling, as if there was something going to happen any moment. Abruptly there came a slight noise from the east end of the hall, and I felt the star of men move suddenly. "Steady, keep steady," I shouted, and they quietened. I looked up the hall and saw that the dogs were upon their feet, and staring in an extraordinary fashion toward the great entrance. I turned and stared also, and felt the men move as they craned their heads to look. Suddenly the dogs set up a tremendous barking, and I glanced across to them, and found they were still pointing for the big doorway. They ceased their noise just as quickly and seemed to be listening. In the same instant I heard a faint chink of metal to my left. That set me staring at the hook which held the great door wide. It moved even as I looked. Some invisible thing was meddling with it. A queer, sickening thrill went through me, and I felt all the men about me stiffen and go rigid with intensity. I had a certainty of something impending, as it might be the impression of an invisible but overwhelming presence. The hall was full of a queer silence, and not a sound came from the dogs. Then I saw the hook slowly raised from out of its hasp, without any visible thing touching it. Then a sudden power of movement came to me. I raised my camera with the flashlight fixed, and snapped it at the door. There came the great blare of the flashlight, and a simultaneous roar of barking from the two dogs. The intensity of the flash made all the place seem dark for some moments, and in that time of darkness, I heard a jingle in the direction of the door, and strained to look. The effect of the bright light passed, and I could see clearly again. The great entrance door was being slowly closed. It shut with a sharp snick, and there followed a long silence, broken only by the whimpering of the dogs. I turned suddenly and looked at Wentworth. He was looking at me. "Just as it did before," he whispered. "Most extraordinary," I said, and he nodded and looked round nervously. The policemen were pretty quiet, and I judged that they were feeling rather worse than Wentworth, though for that matter, you must not think that I was altogether natural. Yet I have seen so much that is extraordinary that I dare say I can keep my nerves steady longer than most people. I looked over my shoulder at the men and cautioned them in a low voice not to move outside of the barriers, whatever happened, not even though the house should seem to be rocking and about to tumble onto them, for well I knew what some of the great forces are capable of doing. Yet unless it should prove to be one of the cases of the more terrible Psyche manifestation, we were almost certain of safety, so long as we kept to our order within the pentacle. Perhaps an hour and a half passed, quietly, except when once in a way the dogs would whine distressfully. Presently, however, they ceased even from this, and I could see them lying on the floor with their paws over their noses, in a most peculiar fashion, and shivering visibly. The sight made me feel more serious, as you can understand. Suddenly, the candle in the corner furthest from the main door went out. An instant later, Wentworth jerked my arm, and I saw that the candle before one of the sealed doors had been put out. I held my camera ready. Then, one after another, every candle about the hall was put out, and with such speed and irregularity that I could never catch one in the actual act of being extinguished. Yet for all that, I took a flashlight of the hall in general. There was a time in which I sat half blinded by the great glare of the flash, and I blamed myself for not having remembered to bring a pair of smoked goggles, which I have sometimes used at these times. I had felt the men jump at the sudden light, and I called out loud to them to sit quiet and to keep their feet exactly to their proper places. My voice, as you can imagine, sounded rather horrid and frightening in the great room, and altogether it was a beastly moment. Then I was able to see again, and I stared here and there about the hall, but there was nothing showing unusual. Only, of course, it was dark now over in the corners. Suddenly I saw that the great fire was blackening. It was going out visibly as I looked. If I said that some monstrous, invisible, impossible creature sucked the life from it, I could best explain the way the light and flame went out of it. It was most extraordinary to watch. In the time that I watched it, every vestige of fire was gone from it, and there was no light outside of the ring of candles around the pentacle. The deliberateness of the thing troubled me more than I can make clear to you. It conveyed to me such a sense of calm, deliberate force present in the hall. The steadfast intention to make a darkness was horrible. The extent of the power to affect the material was horrible. The extent of the power to affect the material was now the one constant, anxious questioning in my brain. You can understand. Behind me I heard the policemen moving again, and I knew that they were getting thoroughly frightened. I turned half round and told them quietly but plainly that they were safe only so long as they stayed within the pentacle, in the position in which I had put them. If they once broke and went outside of the barrier, no knowledge of mine could state the full extent of the dreadfulness of the danger. I steadied them up by this quiet, straight reminder, but if they had known, as I knew, that there is no certainty in any protection, they would have suffered a great deal more, and probably have broken the defense, and made a mad, foolish run for an impossible safety. Another hour passed after this, in absolute quietness. I had a sense of awful strain and oppression, as though I were a little spirit in the company of some invisible, brooding monster of the unseen world, who, as yet, was scarcely conscious of us. I leant across to Wentworth and asked him in a whisper whether he had a feeling as if something were in the room. He looked very pale, and his eyes kept always on the move. He glanced just once at me and nodded, then stared away round the hall again, and when I came to think, I was doing the same thing. Abruptly, as though 100 unseen hands had snuffed them, every candle in the barrier went dead out. and we were left in a darkness that seemed for a little absolute, for the light of the pentacle was too weak and pale to penetrate far across the great hall. I tell you, for a moment, I just sat there as though I had been frozen solid. I felt the creep go all over me, and seemed to stop in my brain. I felt all at once to be given a power of hearing that was far beyond the normal. I could hear my own heart thudding most extraordinarily loud. I began, however, to feel better after a while, but I simply had not the pluck to move. You can understand. Presently, I began to get my courage back. I gripped at my camera and flashlight and waited. My hands were simply soaked with sweat. I glanced once at Wentworth. I could see him only dimly. His shoulders were hunched a little, his head forward, but though it was motionless, I knew that his eyes were not. It is queer how one knows that sort of thing at times. The police were just as silent, and thus a while passed. A sudden sound broke across the silence. From two sides of the room there came faint noises. I recognized them at once as the breaking of the sealing wax. The sealed doors were opening. I raised the camera and flashlight, and it was a peculiar mixture of fear and courage that helped me to press the button. As the great flare of light lit up the hall, I felt the men all about me jump. The darkness fell like a clap of thunder, if you can understand, and seemed tenfold. Yet in the moment of brightness, I had seen that all the sealed doors were wide open. Suddenly, all around us there sounded a drip, drip, drip upon the floor of the great hall. I thrilled with a queer, realizing emotion, and a sense of a very real and present danger imminent. The blood drip had commenced, and the grim question was now whether the barriers could save us from whatever had come into the huge room. Through some awful minutes the blood drip continued to fall in an increasing rain, and presently some began to fall within the barriers. I saw several great drops splash and star upon the pale glowing intertwining tubes of the electric pentacle, but strangely enough, I could not trace that any fell among us. Beyond the strange, horrible noise of the drip, there was no other sound. And then abruptly from the boarhound over in the far corner, there came a terrible yelling howl of agony, followed instantly by a sickening, breaking noise and an immediate silence. If you have ever, when out shooting, broken a rabbit's neck, you will know the sound, in miniature. Like lightning the thought sprang into my brain. It has crossed the pentacle, for you will remember that I had made one about each of the dogs. I thought instantly, with a sick apprehension of our own barriers. There was something in the hall with us that had passed the barrier of the pentacle about one of the dogs. In the awful succeeding silence I positively quivered, and suddenly one of the men behind me gave out a scream, like any woman, and bolted for the door. He fumbled and had it open in a moment. I yelled to the others not to move, but they followed like sheep, and I heard them kick the candles flying in their panic. One of them stepped on the electric pentacle and smashed it, and there was an utter darkness. In an instant I realized that I was defenseless against the powers of the unknown world, and with one savage leap I was out of the useless barriers and instantly through the great doorway and into the night. I believe I yelled with sheer funk. The men were a little ahead of me, and I never ceased running, and neither did they. Sometimes I glanced back over my shoulder, and I kept glancing into the laurels which grew all along the drive. The beastly things kept rustling in a hollow sort of way, as though something were keeping parallel with me among them. The rain had stopped, and a dismal little wind kept moaning through the grounds. It was disgusting. I caught Wentworth and the police at the lodge gate. We got outside and ran all the way to the village. We found old Dennis up waiting for us, and half the villagers to keep him company. He told us that he had known in his soul that we should come back, that is, if we came back at all, which is not a bad rendering of his remark. Fortunately, I had brought my camera away from the house, possibly because the strap had happened to be over my head. Yet I did not go straight away to develop, but sat with the rest of the bar where we talked for some hours, trying to be coherent about the whole horrible business. Later, however, I went up to my room and proceeded with my photography. I was steadier now, and it was just possible, so I hoped, that the negatives might show something. On 2 of the plates I found nothing unusual, but on the 3rd, which was the first one that I snapped, I saw something that made me quite excited. I examined it very carefully with a magnifying glass, then I put it to wash, and slipped a pair of rubber overshoes over my boots. The negative had showed me something very extraordinary, and I had made up my mind to test the truth of what it seemed to indicate, without losing another moment. It was no use telling anything to Wentworth and the police until I was certain, and also I believed that I stood a greater chance to succeed by myself. though for that matter, I do not suppose anything would have taken them up to the manor again that night. I took my revolver and went quietly downstairs and into the dark. The rain had commenced again, but that did not bother me. I walked hard. When I came to the lodge gates, a sudden queer instinct stopped me from going through, and I climbed the wall into the park. I kept away from the drive and approached the building through the dismal, dripping laurels. You can imagine how beastly it was. Every time a leaf rustled, I jumped. I made my way round to the back of the big house and got in through a little window which I had taken note of during my search, for of course I knew the whole place from roof to cellars. I went silently up the kitchen stairs, fairly quivering with funk, and at the top I went to the left, and then into a long corridor that opened through one of the doorways we had sealed into the big hall. I looked up it and saw a faint flicker of light away at the end, and I tiptoed silently toward it, holding my revolver ready. As I came near to the open door, I heard men's voices, and then a burst of laughing. I went on until I could see into the hall. There were several men there, all in a group. They were well dressed, and one, at least, I saw was armed. They were examining my barriers against the supernatural, with a good deal of unkind laughter. I never felt such a fool in my life. It was plain to me that they were a gang of men who had made use of the empty manor, perhaps for years, for some purpose of their own. And now that Wentworth was attempting to take possession, they were acting up the traditions of the place, with the view of driving him away, and keeping so useful a place still at their disposal. But what they were, I mean whether coiners, thieves, inventors, or what, I could not imagine. Presently they left the pentacle and gathered round the living boarhound, which seemed curiously quiet, as though it were half drugged. There was some talk as to whether to let the poor brute live or not, but finally they decided it would be good policy to kill it. I saw two of them force a twisted loop of rope into its mouth, and the two bites of the loop were brought together at the back of the hound's neck. Then a third man thrust a thick walking stick through the two loops. The two men with the rope stooped to hold the dog, so that I could not see what was done. But the poor beast gave a sudden awful howl, and immediately there was a repetition of the uncomfortable breaking sound I had heard earlier in the night, as you will remember. The men stood up and left the dog lying there, quiet enough now, as you may suppose. For my part, I fully appreciated the calculated remorselessness which had decided upon the animal's death, and the cold determination with which it had been afterward executed so neatly. I guessed that a man who might get into the light of those particular men would be likely to come to quite as an uncomfortable an ending. A minute later, one of the men called out to the rest that they should shift their wires. One of the men came toward the doorway of the corridor in which I stood, and I ran quickly back into the darkness of the upper end. I saw the man reach up and take something from the top of the door, and I heard the slight, ringing jangle of steel wire. When he had gone, I ran back again and saw the men passing, one after another, through an opening in the stairs formed by one of the marble steps being raised. When the last man had vanished, the slab that made the step was shut down, and there was not a sign of the secret door. It was the seventh step from the bottom, as I took care to count, and a splendid idea, for it was so solid that it did not ring hollow, even to a faintly heavy hammer, as I found later. There is a little more to tell. I got out of the house as quickly and quietly as possible and back to the inn. The police came without any coaxing when they knew the ghosts were normal flesh and blood. We entered the park and the manor in the same way that I had done, yet when we tried to open the step we failed and had to finally smash it. This must have warned the haunters, for when we descended to a secret room, which we found at the end of a long and narrow passage in the thickness of the walls, we found no one. The police were horribly disgusted, as you can imagine, but for my part I did not care either way. I had laid the ghost, as you might say, and that was what I set out to do. I was not particularly afraid of being laughed at by the others, for they had all been thoroughly taken in, and in the end I had scored without their help. We searched right through the secret ways and found that there was an exit at the end of a long tunnel, which opened in the side of a well out in the grounds. The ceiling of the wall was hollow and reached by a little secret stairway inside of the big staircase. The blood drip was merely colored water, dropped through the minute crevices of the ornamented ceiling. How the candles in the fire were put out, I do not know. For the haunters certainly did not act quite up to tradition, which held that the lights were put out by the blood drip. Perhaps it was too difficult to direct the fluid without positively squirting it, which might have given the whole thing away. The candles in the fire may possibly have been extinguished by the agency of carbonic acid gas, but how suspended, I have no idea. The secret hiding places were, of course, ancient. There was also, did I tell you, a bell which they had rigged up to ring when anyone entered the gates at the end of the drive. If I had not climbed the wall, I should have found nothing for my pains, for the bell would have warned them had I gone in through the gateway. What was on the negative? I asked with much curiosity. A picture of the fine wire with which they were grappling for the hook that held the entrance door open. They were doing it from one of the crevices in the ceiling. They had evidently made no preparations for lifting the hook. I suppose that they never thought anyone would make use of it, and so they had to improvise a grapple. The wire was too fine to be seen by the amount of light we had in the hall, but the flashlight picked it out, do you see? The opening of the inner doors was managed by wires, as you will have guessed, which they unshipped after use, or else I should have found them when I made my search. I think I have now explained everything. The hound was killed, of course, by the men direct. You see, they made the place as dark as possible first. Of course, if I had managed to take a flashlight just at that instant, the whole secret of the haunting would have been exposed. But fate just ordered it the other way. And the tramps? I asked. Oh, you mean the 2 tramps who were found dead in the manor, said Carnacki. Well, of course it is impossible to be sure one way or the other. Perhaps they happened to find out something and were given a hypodermic. Or it is just as probable that they had come to the time of their dying and just died naturally. It is conceivable that a great many tramps had slept in the old house at one time or another. Carnacki stood up, knocked out his pipe. We rose also and went for our coats and hats. Out you go, said Carnacki genially, using the recognized formula, and we went out onto the embankment, and presently through the darkness, to our various homes. The Whistling Room by William Hope Hodgson. Carnacki shook a friendly fist at me as I entered late. Then he opened the door into the dining room and ushered the 4 of us, Jessup, Arkwright, Taylor, and myself, into dinner. We dined well as usual, and equally as usual, Carnacki was pretty silent during the meal. At the end, we took our wine and cigars to our usual positions, and Carnacki, having got himself comfortable in his big chair, began without any preliminary. I have just got back from Ireland again, he said, and I thought you chaps would be interested to hear my news. Besides, I fancy I shall see the thing clearer after I have told it all out straight. I must tell you this, though. At the beginning, up to the present moment, I have been utterly and completely stumped. I have tumbled upon one of the most peculiar cases of haunting, or devilment of some sort, that I have come against. Now listen. I have been spending the last few weeks at Eastre Castle, about 20 miles northeast of Galloway. I got a letter about a month ago from a Mr. Sid K. Tassick, who it seemed had bought the place lately and moved in, only to find that he had bought a very peculiar piece of property. When I got there, he met me at the station, driving a jaunting car, and drove me up to the castle, which, by the way, he called a house shanty. I found that he was pigging it there with his boy brother and another American, who seemed to be half servant and half companion. It seems that all the servants had left the place, in a body, as you might say, and now they were managing among themselves, assisted by some day help. The 3 of them got together a scratch feed, and Tassick told me about all the trouble, whilst we were at table. It is most extraordinary, and different from anything that I've had to do with, though that buzzing case was very queer too. Tassick began in the middle of his story. We got a room in this shanty, he said, which has got a most infernal whistling in it, sort of haunting it. The thing starts any time. You never know when, and it goes on until it frightens you. All the servants have gone, as you know. It's not ordinary whistling, and it isn't the wind. Wait till you hear it. We're all carrying guns, said the boy, and slapped his coat pocket. As bad as that? I said, and the older boy nodded. It may be soft, he replied, but wait till you've heard it. Sometimes I think it's some infernal thing, and the next moment, I'm just as sure someone's playing a trick on me. Why? I asked. What is to be gained? You mean, he said, that people usually have some good reason for playing tricks as elaborate as this. Well, I'll tell you. There's a lady in this province by the name of Miss Donahue, who's going to be my wife this day 2 months. She's more beautiful than they make them, and so far as I can see, I've just stuck my head into an Irish hornet's nest. There's about a score of hot young Irishmen been courting her these 2 years gone, and now that I'm come along and cut them out, they feel raw against me. Do you begin to understand the possibilities? Yes, I said. Perhaps I do in a vague sort of way. But I don't see how all this affects the room.
Like this, he said. When I fixed it up with Miss Donahue, I looked out for a place and bought this little house shanty. Afterward, I told her one evening during dinner that I'd decided to tie up here. And then she asked me whether I wasn't afraid of the whistling room. I told her it must have been thrown in gratis, as I'd heard nothing about it. There were some of her men friends present, and I saw a smile go round. I found out after a bit of questioning that several people have bought this place during the last 20-odd years, and it was always on the market again, after a trial. Well, the chap started to bait me a bit and offered to take bets after dinner that I'd not stay 6 months in the place. I looked once or twice to Miss Donahue, so as to be sure I was getting the note of the talkie-talkie, but I could see that she didn't take it as a joke at all. Partly, I think, because there was a bit of a sneer in the way the men were tackling me, and partly because she really believes there is something in this yarn of the whistling room. However, after dinner I did what I could to even things up with the others. I nailed all their bets and screwed them down hard and safe. I guess some of them are going to be hard hit, unless I lose, which I don't mean to. Well, there you have practically the whole yarn.
Not quite, I told him. All that I know is that you have bought a castle with a room in it that is in some way queer, and that you've been doing some betting. Also, I know that your servants have got frightened and run away. Tell me something about the whistling.
Oh, that, said Tassoc. That started the second night we were in. I'd had a good look round the room in the daytime, as you can understand, for the talk up at Arlestray, Miss Donahue's place, had made me wonder a bit, but it seems just as usual as some of the other rooms in the old wing, only perhaps a bit more lonesome, but that may be only because of the talk about it, you know. The whistling started about 10 o'clock on the second night, as I said. Tom and I were in the library when we heard an awfully queer whistling, coming along the east corridor. The room is in the east wing, you know. That's the blessed ghost, I said to Tom, and we collared the lamps off the table and went up to have a look. I tell you, even as we dug along the corridor, it took me a bit in the throat. It was so beastly queer. It was a sort of tune in a way, but more as if a devil or some rotten thing were laughing at you and going to get round at your back. That's how it makes you feel. When we got to the door, we didn't wait, but rushed it open, and then I tell you, the sound of the thing fairly hit me in the face. Tom said he got it the same way, sort of felt stunned and bewildered. We looked all around and soon got so nervous we just cleared out, and I locked the door. We came down here and had a stiff peg each. Then we got fit again, and began to think we'd been nicely had. So we took sticks and went out into the grounds, thinking after all it must be some of these confounded Irishmen working the ghost trick on us. But there was not a leg stirring. We went back into the house and walked over it, and then paid another visit to the room. But we simply couldn't understand it. We fairly ran out and locked the door again. I don't know how to put it into words, but I had a feeling of being up against something that was rottenly dangerous. You know? We've carried our guns ever since. Of course, we had a real turnout of the room next day, and the whole house place, and we even hunted round the grounds, but there was nothing queer. And now I don't know what to think, except that the sensible part of me tells me that it's some plan of these wild Irishmen to take a rise out of me.
Done anything since? I asked him.
Yes, he said. Watched outside the door of the room at nights, and chased round the grounds, and sounded the walls and the floor of the room. We've done everything we could think of, and it's beginning to get on our nerves, so we sent for you.
By this we had finished eating. As we rose from the table, Tassoc suddenly called out, "Shh! Hark!" We were instantly silent, listening. Then I heard it, an extraordinary hooning whistle, monstrous and inhuman, coming from far away through the corridors to my right.
"By God," said Tassoc, "and it's scarcely dark yet. Call those candles, both of you, and come along."
In a few moments we were all out of the door and racing up the stairs. Tassoc turned into a long corridor and we followed, shielding our candles as we ran. The sound seemed to fill all the passage as we drew near, until I had the feeling that the whole air throbbed under the power of some wanton, immense force. A sense of an actual taint, as you might say, of monstrosity all about us. Tassoc unlocked the door, then giving it a push with his foot, jumped back and drew his revolver. As the door flew open, the sound beat out at us, with an effect impossible to explain to no one who has not heard it, with a certain horrible personal note in it, as if there in the darkness you could picture the room rocking and creaking in a mad, vile glee to its own filthy piping and whistling and hooning. To stand there and listen was to be stunned by realization. It was as if someone showed you the mouth of a vast pit suddenly and said, "That's hell," and you knew that they had spoken the truth. Do you get it even a little bit? I stepped back a pace into the room and held the candle over my head and looked quickly round. Tassoc and his brother joined me, and the man came up at the back and we all held our candles high. I was deafened with the shrill piping hoon of the whistling. And then, clear in my ear, something seemed to be saying to me, "Get out of here, quick, quick, quick." As you chaps know, I never neglect that sort of thing. Sometimes it may be nothing but nerves. But as you will remember, it was just such a warning that saved me in the gray dog case, and in the yellow finger experiments, as well as other times. Well, I turned sharp round to the others. "Out," I said. "For God's sake, out quick." In an instant I had them into the passage. There came an extraordinary yelling scream into the hideous whistling, and then, like a clap of thunder, an utter silence. I slammed the door and locked it. Then, taking the key, I looked round at the others. They were pretty white, and I imagine I must have looked that way too. And there we stood a moment, silent.
"Come down out of this and have some whiskey,"
said Tassoc at last, in a voice he tried to make ordinary. And he led the way. I was the back man, and I know we all kept looking over our shoulders. When we got downstairs, Tassoc passed the bottle round. He took a drink himself and slapped his glass down onto the table, then sat down with a thud.
"That's a lovely thing to have in the house with you, isn't it?"
he said, and directly afterward,
"What on earth made you hustle us all out like that, Carnacki?"
"Something seemed to be telling me to get out quick," I said. "Sounds a bit silly, superstitious, I know, but when you are meddling with this sort of thing, you've got to take notice of queer fancies and risk being laughed at." I told him then about the gray dog business, and he nodded a lot to that. "Of course," I said, "this may be nothing more than those would-be rivals of yours playing some funny game, but personally, though I'm going to keep an open mind, I feel that there is something beastly and dangerous about this thing." We talked for a while longer, and then Tassoc suggested billiards, which we played in a pretty half-hearted fashion, and all the time cocking an ear to the door, as you might say, for sounds, but none came. And later, after coffee, he suggested early bed, and a thorough overhaul of the room on the morrow. My bedroom was in the newer part of the castle, and the door opened into the picture gallery. At the east end of the gallery was the entrance to the corridor of the east wing. This was shut off from the gallery by two old and heavy oak doors, which looked rather odd and quaint beside the more modern doors of the various rooms. When I reached my room, I did not go to bed, but began to unpack my instrument trunk, of which I had retained the key. I intended to take one or two preliminary steps at once in my investigation of the extraordinary whistling. Presently, when the castle had settled into quietness, I slipped out of my room and across to the entrance of the great corridor. I opened one of the low, squat doors and threw the beam of my pocket searchlight down the passage. It was empty, and I went through the doorway and pushed to the oak behind me, then along the great passageway, throwing my light before and behind, keeping my revolver handy. I had hung a protection belt of garlic round my neck, and the smell of it seemed to fill the corridor and give me assurance. For as you all know, it is a wonderful protection against the more useful, airy forms of semi-materialization, by which I suppose the whistling might be produced. Though at that period of my investigation, I was quite prepared to find it due to some perfectly natural cause, for it is astonishing the enormous number of cases that prove to have nothing abnormal in them. In addition to wearing the necklet, I had plugged my ears loosely with garlic, and as I did not intend to stay more than a few minutes in the room, I hoped to be safe. When I reached the door and put my hand into my pocket for the key, I had a sudden feeling of sickening funk, but I was not going to back out if I could help it. I unlocked the door and turned the handle. Then I gave the door a sharp push with my foot, as Tassoc had done, and drew my revolver, though I did not expect to have any use for it, really. I shone the searchlight all round the room and then stepped inside, with a disgustingly horrible feeling of walking slap into awaiting danger. I stood a few seconds, waiting, and nothing happened, and the empty room showed bare from corner to corner. And then, I realized that the room was full of an abominable silence. Can you understand that? A sort of purposeful silence, just as sickening as any of the filthy noises the things have power to make. Do you remember what I told you about that silent garden business? Well, this room had just the same malevolent silence, the beastly quietness of a thing that is looking at you and not seeable itself, and thinks that it has got you. Oh, I recognized it instantly, and I whipped the top off my lantern so as to have light over the whole room. Then I set to working like a fury, and keeping my glance all about me. I sealed the 2 windows with lengths of human hair right across, and sealed them at every frame. As I worked, a queer, scarcely perceptible tenseness stole into the air of the place, and the silence seemed, if you can understand me, to grow more solid. I knew then I had no business there without full protection, for I was practically certain that this was no mere, airy development, but one of the worst forms of the psyche, like the grunting man case, you know. I finished the window and hurried over to the great fireplace. This is a huge affair and has a queer gallows iron, I think they are called, projecting from the back of the arch. I sealed the opening with 7 human hairs, the 7th crossing the 6 others. Then, just as I was making an end, a low, mocking whistle grew in the room. A cold, nervous pricking went up my spine and round my forehead from the back. The hideous sound filled all the room with an extraordinary, grotesque parody of human whistling, too gigantic to be human, as if something gargantuan and monstrous made the sound softly. As I stood there a last moment pressing down the final seal, I had no doubt but that I had come across one of those rare and horrible cases of the inanimate reproducing the functions of the animate. I made a grab for my lamp and went quickly to the door, looking over my shoulder and listening for the thing that I expected. It came, just as I got my hand upon the handle, a squeal of incredible, malevolent anger, piercing through the low hooning of the whistling. I dashed out, slamming the door and locking it. I leant a little against the opposite wall of the corridor, feeling rather funny, for it had been a narrow squeak. There be no safety to be gained by guards of holiness when the monster hath power to speak through wood and stone, so runs the passage in the Sigsand manuscript, and I proved it in that nodding door business. There is no protection against this particular form of monster, except, possibly for a fractional period of time, for it can reproduce itself in, or take to its purpose, the very protective material which you may use, and has the power to form within the pentacle, though not immediately. There is, of course, the possibility of the unknown last line of the Sama ritual being uttered, but it is too uncertain to count upon, and the danger is too hideous, and even then it has no power to protect for more than maybe 5 beats of the heart, as the Sigsand has it. Inside of the room there was now a constant, meditative hooning whistling, but presently this ceased, and the silence seemed worse, for there is such a sense of hidden mischief in a silence. After a little I sealed the door with crossed hairs, and then cleared off down the great passage, and so to bed. For a long time I lay awake, but managed eventually to get some sleep. Yet about 2 o'clock I was waked by the hooning whistling of the room coming to me, even through the closed doors. The sound was tremendous, and seemed to beat through the whole house with a presiding sense of terror, as if, I remember thinking, some monstrous giant had been holding mad carnival with itself at the end of the great passage. I got up and sat on the edge of the bed, wondering whether to go along and have a look at the seal, and suddenly there came a thump on my door, and Tassoc walked in, with his dressing gown over his pajamas.
"I thought it would have waked you, so I came along to have a talk," he said. "I can't sleep. Beautiful, isn't it?"
"Extraordinary," I said, and tossed him my case. He lit a cigarette and we sat and talked for about an hour, and all the time that noise went on, down at the end of the big corridor. Suddenly, Tassoc stood up.
"Let's take our guns and go examine the brute,"
he said, and turned toward the door. "No," I said. "By Jove, no. I can't say anything definite yet, but I believe the room is about as dangerous as it well can be."
"Haunted? Really haunted?"
he asked keenly and without any of his frequent banter. I told him, of course, that I could not say a definite yes or no to such a question, but that I hoped to be able to make a statement soon. Then I gave him a little lecture on the false rematerialization of the animate force through the inanimate inert. He began to see the particular way in the room might be dangerous, if it were really the subject of a manifestation. About an hour later the whistling ceased quite suddenly, and Tassoc went off again to bed. I went back to mine also, and eventually got another spell of sleep. In the morning I went along to the room. I found the seals on the door intact. Then I went in. The window seals and the hair were all right, but the 7th hair across the great fireplace was broken. This set me thinking. I knew that it might very possibly have snapped through my having tensioned it too tightly, but then again, it might have been broken by something else. Yet it was scarcely possible that a man, for instance, could have passed between the 6 unbroken hairs, for no one would have ever noticed them, entering that room that way, you see, but just walked through them, ignorant of their very existence. I removed the other hairs and the seals. Then I looked up the chimney. It went up straight, and I could see blue sky at the top. It was a big, open flue, and free from any suggestion of hiding places or corners. Yet, of course, I did not trust to any such casual examination, and after breakfast, I put on my overalls and climbed to the very top, sounding all the way, but I found nothing. Then I came down and went over the whole of the room, floor, ceiling, and walls, mapping them out in 6-inch squares and sounding with both hammer and probe, but there was nothing abnormal. Afterward, I made a 3-week search of the whole castle in the same thorough way, but found nothing. I went even further then, for at night, when the whistling commenced, I made a microphone test. You see, if the whistling were mechanically produced, this test would have made evident to me the working of the machinery, if there were any such concealed within the walls. It certainly was an up-to-date method of examination, as you must allow. Of course, I did not think that any of Tassik's rivals had fixed up any mechanical contrivance, but I thought it just possible that there had been some such thing for producing the whistling, made away back in the years, perhaps with the intention of giving the room a reputation that would ensure its being free of inquisitive folk. You see what I mean? Well, of course, it was just possible, if this were the case, that someone knew the secret of the machinery and was utilizing the knowledge to play this devil of a prank on Tasik. The microphone test of the walls would certainly have made this known to me, as I have said, but there was nothing of the sort in the castle. So that I had practically no doubt at all now, but that it was a genuine case of what is properly termed haunting. All this time, every night, and sometimes most of each night, the hooning whistling of the room was intolerable. It was as if an intelligence there knew the steps were being taken against it, and piped and hooned in a sort of mad, mocking contempt. I tell you, it was as extraordinary as it was horrible. Time after time, I went along, tiptoeing noiselessly on stockinged feet to the sealed door, for I always kept the room sealed. I went at all hours of the night, and often the whistling inside would seem to change to a brutally malignant note, as though the half-animate monster saw me plainly through the shut door, and all the time the shrieking, hooning whistling would fill the whole corridor, so that I used to feel a precious lonely chap, messing about there with one of hell's mysteries. And every morning I would enter the room and examine the different hairs and seals. You see, after the first week, I had stretched parallel hairs all along the walls of the room, and along the ceiling. But over the floor, which was of polished stone, I had set out little, colorless wafers, tacky side uppermost. Each wafer was numbered, and they were arranged after a definite plan, so that I should be able to trace the exact movements of any living thing that went across the floor. You will see that no material being or creature could possibly have entered that room without leaving many signs to tell me about it, but nothing was ever disturbed, and I began to think that I should have to risk an attempt to stay the night in the room, in the electric pentacle. Yet, mind you, I knew that it would be a crazy thing to do, but I was getting stumped and ready to do anything. Once, about midnight, I did break the seal on the door and have a quick look in, but I tell you, the whole room gave one mad yell and seemed to come toward me in a great belly of shadows, as if the walls had bellied in toward me. Of course, that must have been fancy. Anyway, the yell was sufficient, and I slammed the door and locked it, feeling a bit weak down my spine. You know the feeling. And then when I had got to that state of readiness for anything, I made something of a discovery. It was about 1 in the morning, and I was walking slowly round the castle, keeping in the soft grass. I had come under the shadow of the east front, and far above me I could hear the vile hooning, whistle of the room, up in the darkness of the unlit wing. Then suddenly, a little in front of me, I heard a man's voice, speaking low but evidently in glee. "By George, you chaps, but I wouldn't care to bring a wife home in that," it said in the tone of the cultured Irish. Someone started to reply, but there came a sharp exclamation, and then a rush, and I heard footsteps running in all directions. Evidently, the men had spotted me. For a few seconds I stood there feeling an awful ass. After all, they were at the bottom of the haunting. Do you see what a big fool it made me seem? I had no doubt but that they were some of Tassik's rivals, and here I had been feeling in every bone that I had hit a real, bad, genuine case. And then, there came the memory of hundreds of details that made me just as much in doubt again. Anyway, whether it was natural or abnatural, there was a great deal yet to be cleared up. I told Tassik next morning what I had discovered, and through the whole of every night for 5 nights we kept a close watch round the east wing, but there was never a sign of anyone prowling about. And all the time, almost from evening to dawn, that grotesque whistling would hoon incredibly, far above us in the darkness. On the morning after the 5th night, I received a wire from here which brought me home by the next boat. I explained to Tassoc that I was simply bound to come away for a few days, but I told him to keep up watch round the castle. One thing I was very careful to do, and that was to make him absolutely promise never to go into the room between sunset and sunrise. I made it clear to him that we knew nothing definite yet, one way or the other, and if the room were what I had first thought it to be, it might be a lot better for him to die first than enter it after dark. When I got here and had finished my business, I thought you chaps would be interested, and also I wanted to get it all spread out clear in my mind, so I rung you up. I am going over again tomorrow, and when I get back, I ought to have something pretty extraordinary to tell you. By the way, there was a curious thing I forgot to tell you. I tried to get a phonographic record of the whistling, but it simply produced no impression on the wax at all. That is one of the things that has made me feel queer, I can tell you. Another extraordinary thing is that the microphone will not magnify the sound, will not even transmit it, seems to take no account of it, and acts as if it were non-existent. I am absolutely and utterly stumped. Up to the present, I am a wee bit curious to see whether any of your dear clever heads can make daylight of it. I cannot yet. He rose to his feet. "Good night, all," he said, and began to usher us out abruptly, but without offense, into the night. A fortnight later, he dropped each of us a card, and you can imagine that I was not late this time. When we arrived, Carnacki took us straight into dinner, and when we had finished, and all made ourselves comfortable, he began again, where we had left off. "Now just listen quietly, for I've got something pretty queer to tell you. I got back late at night, and I had to walk up to the castle, as I had not warned them that I was coming. It was bright moonlight, so that the walk was rather a pleasure than otherwise. When I got there, the whole place was in darkness, and I thought I would take a walk round outside to see whether Tassoc or his brother was keeping watch. But I could not find them anywhere, and concluded that they had got tired of it and gone off to bed. As I returned across the front of the east wing, I caught the hooning whistling of the room, coming down strangely through the stillness of the night. It had a queer note in it, I remember, low and constant, queerly meditative. I looked up at the window, bright in the moonlight, and got a sudden thought to bring a ladder from the stable yard, and try to get a look into the room through the window. With this notion I hunted round at the back of the castle, among the straggle of offices, and presently found a long, fairly light ladder, though it was heavy enough for one, goodness knows, and I thought at first I should never get it reared. I managed at last, and let the ends rest quietly against the wall, a little below the sill of the larger window. Then going silently I went up the ladder. Presently I had my face above the sill and was looking in, alone with the moonlight. Of course the queer whistling sounded louder up there, but it still conveyed that peculiar sense of something whistling quietly to itself, can you understand? Though for all the meditative lowness of the note, the horrible, gargantuan quality was distinct, a mighty parody of the human, as if I stood there and listened to the whistling from the lips of a monster with a man's soul. And then, I saw something. The floor in the middle of the huge empty room was puckered upward in the center into a strange, soft-looking mound, parted at the top into an ever-changing hole that pulsated to that great, gentle hooning. At times as I watched, I saw the heaving of the indented mound, gap across with a queer inward suction, as with the drawing of an enormous breath. Then the thing would dilate and pout once more to the incredible melody. And suddenly as I stared, dumb, it came to me that the thing was living. I was looking at two enormous blackened lips, blistered and brutal, there in the pale moonlight. Abruptly they bulged out to a vast, pouting mound of force and sound, stiffened and swollen, and hugely massive and clean-cut in the moonbeams. And as a great sweat lay heavy on the vast upper lip, in the same moment of time the whistling had burst into a mad, screaming note that seemed to stun me, even where I stood outside of the window. And then the following moment I was staring blankly at the solid, undisturbed floor of the room, smooth, polished stone flooring from wall to wall, and there was an absolute silence. You can picture me staring into the quiet room, and knowing what I knew, I felt like a sick, frightened kid, and wanted to slide quietly down the ladder and run away. But in that very instant I heard Tassoc's voice calling to me from within the room, for help, help. My God, but I got such an awful dazed feeling, and I had a vague, bewildered notion that after all, it was the Irishmen who had got him in there, and were taking it out of him. And then the call came again, and I burst the window and jumped in to help him. I had a confused idea that the call had come from within the shadow of the great fireplace, and I raced across to it, but there was no one there. "Tassoc!" I shouted,
and my voice went empty-sounding round the great apartment. And then in a flash I knew that Tassoc had never called. I whirled round, sick with fear, toward the window, and as I did so a frightful, exultant, whistling scream burst through the room. On my left the end wall had bellied in toward me, in a pair of gargantuan lips, black and utterly monstrous, to within a yard of my face. I fumbled for a mad instant at my revolver, not for it, but myself, for the danger was 1,000 times worse than death. And then, suddenly, the unknown last line of the Samar ritual was whispered quite audibly in the room. Instantly the thing happened that I have known once before. There came a sense as of dust falling continually and monotonously, and I knew that my life hung uncertain and suspended for a flash, in a brief reeling vertigo of unseeable things. Then that ended, and I knew that I might live. My soul and body blended again, and life and power came to me. I dashed furiously at the window and hurled myself out head foremost, for I can tell you that I had stopped being afraid of death. I crashed down onto the ladder and slithered, grabbing and grabbing, and so came some way or other alive to the bottom. And there I sat in the soft, wet grass with the moonlight all about me, and far above, through the broken window of the room, there was a low whistling. That is the chief of it. I was not hurt, and I went round to the front and knocked Tassoc up. When they let me in, we had a long yarn over some good whiskey, for I was shaken to pieces, and I explained things as much as I could. I told Tassoc that the room would have to come down, and every fragment of it, burned in a blast furnace, erected within a pinnacle. He nodded. There was nothing to say. Then I went to bed. We turned a small army onto the work, and within 10 days that lovely thing had gone up in smoke, and what was left was calcined and cleaned. It was when the workmen were stripping the paneling that I got hold of a sound notion of the beginnings of that beastly development. Over the great fireplace, after the great oak panels had been torn down, I found that there was let into the masonry a scroll-work of stone, with on it an old inscription in ancient Celtic that here in this room was burned Dian Tiansay, jester of King Alzoth, who made the song of foolishness upon King Earnor of the 7th castle. When I got the translation clear, I gave it to Tassoc. He was tremendously excited, for he knew the old tale, and took me down to the library to look at an old parchment that gave the story in detail. Afterward I found that the incident was well known about the countryside, but always regarded more as a legend than as history, and no one seemed ever to have dreamt that the old east wing of Eastre Castle was the remains of the ancient 7th castle. From the old parchment I gathered that there had been a pretty dirty job done, away back in the years. It seemed that King Alzoth and King Earnor had been enemies by birthright, as you might say truly, but that nothing more than a little raiding had occurred on either side for years, until Dian Tiansay made the song of foolishness upon King Earnor, and sang it before King Alzoth, and so greatly was it appreciated that King Alzoth gave the jester one of his ladies to wife. Presently all the people of the land had come to know the song, and so it came at last to King Earnor, who was so angered that he made war upon his old enemy, and took and burned him in his castle. But Dian Tiansay the jester he brought with him to his own place, and having torn his tongue out because of the song which he had made and sung, he imprisoned him in the room in the east wing, which was evidently used for unpleasant purposes. And the jester's wife he kept for himself, having a fancy for her prettiness. But one night Dian Tiansay's wife was not to be found, and in the morning they discovered her lying dead in her husband's arms, and he sitting, whistling the song of foolishness, for he no longer had the power to sing it. Then they roasted Dian Tiansay in the great fireplace, probably from that self-same galley iron which I have already mentioned. And until he died, Dian Tiansay ceased not to whistle the song of foolishness, which he could no longer sing. But afterward, in that room, there was often heard at night the sound of something whistling, and there grew a power in that room, so that none dared to sleep in it. And presently, it would seem, the king went to another castle, for the whistling troubled him. There you have it all. Of course, that is only a rough rendering of the translation of the parchment, but it sounds extraordinarily quaint, don't you think so? Yes, I said, answering for the lot. But how did that thing grow to such a tremendous manifestation? One of those cases of continuity of thought producing a positive action upon the immediate surrounding material, replied Carnacki. The development must have been going forward through the centuries to have produced such a monstrosity. It was a true instance of Psyche manifestation, which I can best explain by likening it to a living spiritual fungus, which involves the very structure of the ether fiber itself,
and of course in so doing acquires an essential control over the material substance involved in it. It is impossible to make it plainer in a few words. "What broke the seventh hair?" asked Taylor. But Carnacki did not know. He thought it was probably nothing but being too severely tensioned. He also explained that they found out that the men who had run away had not been up to mischief, but had come over secretly merely to hear the whistling, which indeed had suddenly become the talk of the whole countryside. "One other thing," said Arkwright. "Have you any idea what governs the use of the unknown last line of the Sama ritual? I know, of course, that it was used by the ab-human priests in the incantation of Renee. But what used it on your behalf, and what made it? You had better read Harzan's monograph and my addenda to it on astral and astral coordination and interference," said Carnacki. "It is an extraordinary subject, and I can only say here that the human vibration may not be insulated from the astral, as is always believed to be the case in interferences by the ab-human, without immediate action being taken by those forces which govern the spinning of the outer circle. In other words, it is being proved time after time that there is some inscrutable protective force constantly intervening between the human soul, not the body, mind you, and the outer monstrosities. Am I clear?" "Yes, I think so," I replied. "And you believe that the room had become the material expression of the ancient jester? That his soul, rotten with hatred, had bred into a monster, eh?" I asked. "Yes," said Carnacki, nodding. "I think you've put my thought rather neatly. It is a queer coincidence that Miss Donahue is supposed to be descended, so I have heard since, from the same King Ernor. It makes one think some curious thoughts, doesn't it? The marriage coming on, and the room waking to fresh life. If she had gone into that room ever, eh? It had waited a long time. Sins of the fathers. Yes, I've thought of that. They're to be married next week, and I am to be the best man, which is a thing I hate, and he won his bets rather. Just think, if ever she had gone into that room. Pretty horrible, eh?" He nodded his head grimly, and we four nodded back. Then he rose and took us collectively to the door and presently thrust us forth in friendly fashion on the embankment and into the fresh night air. "Good night," we all called back and went to our various homes. If she had, eh? If she had. That is what I kept thinking.